Good. All right, everybody. Nachiketa over here, and we have a full panel with David, Evelyn, and Andreas Zertis and Raphael. So, welcome everybody to my humble channel, and thank you very much for everybody for coming here. And we're going to be talking about Dune and the Messiah programming. So let's just go around and say hello to everybody. David, how are you doing today, sir?
Hey there, I'm doing great. I was just through the second part of June, so I got all fresh in my mind. Good to see everyone.
Sounds all right. Great. And Andreas, how are you doing, sir?
Pretty stoked. I've been playing around with the Unreal Engine, and I know they're making a Dune game that's like coming out right now. So I've been learning all about what they're trying to do with that. And I think it was like a week ago, I watched the Jodorowsky Dune. Sorry, my door was swinging. The Jodorowsky Dune documentary on what his plans were. So I've been looking into that a lot and just all the different versions of Dune. I didn't get to watch. I have it, but I decided to wait to watch the new one because I want to see it like either in theater or in 4K. So I haven't seen the new Dune 2 yet, but I think someone here probably has. So we'll get some information out of that.
Okay, well, hopefully we won't spoil it too much for you, Andreas.
All right.
So,
Well, I
but
feel
I'm
like
sure we'll be talking about it.
if it's from a book from the '60s that I read, I think it's all right. You can give it a right.
All right, Raphael, how are you doing today, man?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. I was thinking like Andreas playing around with Unreal Engine, of course, that's super awesome. And, we'll see, maybe we'll come around with some interesting ideas. The first thing that made me think of games and Dune, my first exposure to Dune actually was through Dune 2000, I believe. So even ever before I could read the books, you had these like Command and Conquer type games. Warm sign. That's all I can say.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm totally stoked for this. And the real thing I want to know, or encourage everyone as they listen, just to consider how much of potentially true, whatever this would mean, old world information could potentially be encoded in Dune, and or as to what extent was it even some kind of a prediction as to what would happen in the Middle East. So yeah, very, very incredibly interesting book and story, and maybe we will get around to decode some of it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been watching some Frank Herbert's interviews, back in like 1970s or 80s, and maybe even the 60s, and looking at some of his biography. His childhood seems kind of interesting to me. And so let's talk about him and his life to begin with. So what I've learned is that, his mother was Irish Catholic from Wisconsin, and she had like nine other sisters. So it was just all women on the mother's side, 10 ladies, and they were all Catholic. And the aunts believed that Frank should have a Jesuit education. Do you think that might have influenced him somewhat?
With the
I
Bene
didn't even
Gesserits.
research that yet. Oh my God.
Well, the Bene Gesserits. I mean, there's no question. Obviously, I mean, my mom was Catholic, so that's how I got the book. Was my mom was like in like the '60s, went to University of Santa Clara, which is like Catholic school, and studied metaphysics from Jesuits. And I'm pretty sure it was like Father Fallon or one of the metaphysicists got her into Dune in the first place. So it was always kind of presumed to me that it was Catholic, but it couldn't be anything else because you have the Bene Gesserit, like the idea that this group is actually like a religious order and that they're dealing with sort of international play. I mean, later when we talk about Star Wars and things, that like you see how international it plays into it, that at this time in history, a religious order that basically controlled, Japan before the Edo period, and all of Macau, and Portugal. That's definitely in the background. There is the Jesuits in the '60s, and what's going on in the '60s with the Jesuits and the Catholics. JFK is the president, and he gets assassinated. So there's a lot going on, I think, right at that moment.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in about the Bene Gesserits and the Jesuits connection there?
Yeah, when we look at the word, we listen to the word Bene Gesserit, it sounds like Jesuit, obviously, but Bene is also, it sounds like the good Jesuits, and it's almost like a cognitive dissonance implanting thing, because the Jesuits were a military order. They were not good, and well, I mean, at least if you were not
But
one
for
of
whom?
them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it depends on how you look at it, right? I mean,
well,
like,
you can always say that, but
the Jesuits would say they'll take your boys and turn them into
of
men.
course,
You know, yeah,
sure.
like they're really an educational group. You know, they just taught you
mean,
how to be soldiers.
that's marketing. That's what you call marketing. But in the movies, Dune and the old one and the new ones, the Bene Gesserit are unapologetically pragmatic. You could say evil, but they are really more pragmatic. They have their goal, and nothing else matters, which is a military order, right? It's like, well, you have your creed, and you're gonna go there, and nothing else matters. From in that way, they're not very different from the Harkonnen. They're portrayed a little bit different, but it is interesting that they call it Bene Gesserit, I think, to me, just because there's this weird wordplay. And yes, they are, of course, use different methods than the Harkonnen. They use like ancestral child implanting, imprinting, and all that. And the Harkonnen just use brute force. But if you put them side by side and you look just pragmatically what they try to achieve and the lengths and generational planning that goes into it, I think, they're both just orders or gangs or mafias.
Well, okay, but
Yeah,
also
so-
like the Bene Jesuit is because the Benedictine monks are like the ones that put like chocolates on your pillow. You know, they have like they wear all white instead of all black. So I think they're also trying to say, yes, this is the Jesuit, but it's also liberation theology. It's also all the 19th and 20th century Pope Pius on Catholicism, where they ran the hospitals and they did the social services, and the idea that the Bene Gesserit actually are associated somehow with this social optimism. It's not quite that they're a humanitarian order, but it's almost expected that they're supposed to offer, at least wisdom in all circumstances, right? In dispute, they're not supposed to be necessarily as selfish as the corporation because they're looking for some sort of esoteric broader good.
Well, if you look at their like, what is their
what?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Real quick. According to Frank Herbert, when you type in where he was inspired of this Bene Gesserit, it's actually Latin. Bene means good, and Gesserit is actually means it's like well accomplished or well done is the meaning of Bene Gesserit. So you can look it up, the Latin term for this. So go ahead, David or Raphael.
That's a
whoever wants
great
to go.
double entendre. I love it. That's exactly what they would say about themselves, right? The Jesuit would say that they're really just well accomplished, right? And to be a Jesuit, you have to have like 20 years in this field and have like a degree and have done all these amazing PhD like things. Like you have to be a scientist to be a Jesuit. So well accomplished. It's like Master Mason, for the priest.
Yeah, it's great marketing. And that's the role that they are playing in the movies. I haven't read the book, just I will always come back to the movies. The Bene Gesserit are the master manipulators in the books, and they are like like in contrast to the Harkonnen, they're like the female aggression. They're just going through the mind. The Harkonnen, they're going through the body. They brutalize the body, and the Bene Gesserit, they brutalize the mind. I'm not exactly sure right now what is their goal, like with all their ancestral planning for the Bene Gesserit. That would be interesting to talk about, because for me, they're really a military order. I mean, yes, they use female methods, and they also display like the typical archetypal female sisterhood, the ancient goddess worship. But what are they trying to achieve? There's some kind of messiah. That sounds like the same kind of bullshit story that they tell the Fremen on Arrakis just to get into power. What is actually their end goal, if anyone knows?
But there's no distinction between femininity and violence. I would actually say femininity is in itself a sort of violence, the same way masculinity could be, a sort of violence.
No, I said like the feminine type of violence will go more through persuasion, and the masculine type of violence will go more through, well, I mean, like one goes through the mind and the emotions, and the other goes through the body and the physicality. Of course, there's feminine and masculine violence.
Yeah, I feel like the Bene Gesserit are. I agree. They're like emotional, or they're mental, but it's really, I think that's like the Gnostic pistis sophia kind of thing that they're obsessed with, like, because again, like if you get to like the deeper echelons of the Jesuit metaphysics, it's weirder than normal Christianity. It has to do with Sophia, the goddess, like feminine wisdom and all of these things. So I think that he's trying to kind of reveal some of the layers of mysticism that run things, and also how weird it seems as an outsider, because again, you're in a Muslim country, you know, or essentially it's this idea like we're in the Middle East and we're in a place that's not really overwhelmed with like fascination for the Bene Gesserit, but they're running the society because they're associated with the elite and with the Atlanticist power that's taking money and taking water and taking spice.
You're talking about Arrakis?
I guess also, but I'm also talking about our world too, right? Because at a certain point it bleeds together really hard, right? Because we had the exact same issues were going on in the canal, right? Like the Suez Canal was emerging at that moment, and it was becoming very clear, like we have our way of looking at things, and nobody else looks at it that way. And that was really kind of I think the goal of Dune was to show how alien everybody was to each other at that point. Like we were literally as different as, you know, E.T. to each other in terms of culture, in terms of values. And that's not the same anymore. A lot of people are far more similar, but there still are some dynamics in culture that emerge. And that's why Dune has become more relevant again.
So as to answer your question, David, from what I understood, I did read the original book, although I would have to agree. I think Andreas briefly spoke about this yesterday. If I think back now, I think it may have not even been the most pleasant or easy read in itself. Right. And also at times somewhat confusing. It's only now, many years later, with all the additional old world information and so on, and I'm like, oh my God, all of this is clicking. It's the Bene Gesserit, right? But officially, from what I understand, their goal would simply be the Kwisatz Haderach, or however you would pronounce it, the shortening of the way, which is this Messiah, which initially was supposed to be, if I say his name right now, Paul Atreides, or the first Atreides, and the protagonist in the first Dune book, the son, was supposed to be, well, or was not supposed to be the Messiah, because his mother made some choices not in accordance with the order, because she had a child which was male instead of female. I think it's something along those lines.
Right.
But overall, at least they officially claim that this is their main goal. And as to why, because I want to say they want to bring about the unification of the opposites, because they basically want to breed the select royal families in a way, I think they claim, to then achieve perfect stability or perfect prosperous empire.
To bring balance to the force, right?
Yeah.
because Alia Atreides is like Leia, essentially, you know, and Arrakis is Tatooine, and the Kessel Run is for spice and everything. It's just basically Star Wars is a fan fiction. It's like it's like the 50 Shades of Grey version of Twilight, really, is what it is, essentially. Yeah. But it's great. It's great.
So,
but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So Kwisatz Haderach is he got it from a Hebrew word of Kifetz Haderach. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it means the shortening of the path, as Raphael was saying. It's the road, the path, and or also another translation can be grasping the path or grasping the way. Also is another translation of that.
Yeah, so I figure he's probably really into the Tao, right? It's the 60s and the Taoism, but also the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. You know, so I think that's also his thought, the way.
Yeah. So I mean, and he's pulling all, like cultures and language from, you know, all kinds of things, like, and of course we understand that there's a heavy Arabic motif with this whole, you know, and the Bene Gesserits and the kind of like the Western. So if you look at like you know, from the movies, even if you just saw the first one, when you look at all the Bene Gesserits, really they're you know, they look like ladies from Europe. You know, you don't really see a whole lot of mixture going on. But when you look at Dune and all the people who are from Fremen, from Arrakis, they are of that region, you know, of Middle Eastern looking people, right? So
don't they also have a lot of head coverings going on, the Bene Gesserit?
Yep. Yes, like veils and stuff like that. They're also wearing the
burqa,
hijab.
let's just say it,
right?
Yeah. I don't remember how like polylingual Frank Herbert was, but I know that, you know, again in the 60s you had Algeria, you know, you had like the French crisis in Algeria, you know, in Morocco, in 1964 in Egypt, you know, you had, so all of these crises that were going on in the Middle East would have been in his mind permeating, like these are American military events, and it's also that really shocking time where they're trying to force American culture on the Middle East, and the Middle East responds with what we know in the 90s and 2000s is like Al Qaeda and like extremist Islam, like these things that were, because they had like Egyptian pop stars that they were trying to put on television in the 60s, right? And the world was like very much, can we just make everyone like Coca-Cola? And it just wasn't working, and it was really obvious. And this is all right before Vietnam, right? And through Vietnam.
I have a quick, I've just pulled a summary of the Bene Gesserit. I'd like to read this if that's okay with you. It goes through the different agendas and ways that they're trying to achieve them. So the main objectives of the Bene Gesserit: 1, preservation and improvement of the human gene pool. The Bene Gesserit undertake a secretive millennia-long breeding program aimed at refining and enhancing human genetics. Their ultimate goal is to produce a super being they call the Kwisatz Haderach, a male Bene Gesserit who can access both male and female ancestral memories and has the ability to see into the future. 2, manipulation of political and social orders. The Bene Gesserit wield significant influence across the universe, working behind the scenes to manipulate political, social, and religious outcomes. They aim to maintain stability and guide the development of human society according to their own designs, often using their members who are placed in influential positions throughout the galaxy to steer events. 3, survival of humanity. Beneath their specific projects and plans, the Bene Gesserit are driven by a broader goal of ensuring the survival and advancement of humanity. This includes managing threats to human existence and guiding the species through crisis. 4, preservation of knowledge and skills. The Bene Gesserit are custodians of vast amounts of knowledge and ancient techniques, including the voice, a form of mind control, prana bindu training, control over one's body down to the cellular level, and memory transmission, the ability to pass on memories to their offspring. They seek to preserve and pass down this knowledge through their order. And 5th, spiritual and religious influence. Through their Missionaria Protectiva, the Bene Gesserit plant myths and prophecies on various worlds to manipulate local populations and to ensure that a Bene Gesserit can exert influence by fulfilling these prophecies. This long-term planning also serves as a form of protection and influence for the order. So they got a lot going on, and if everything I know about the Jesuits, that's pretty much what I just said, including the stuff we only know of from the science fiction movie, like the techniques and the future and the past stuff, that I wouldn't be surprised the Jesuits have also figured out by now.
They have a pretty cool AI
Yeah,
program. It's true.
So
Well,
you guys,
sure, I
of
could have
course,
just
heard
read
about
like-
the.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but like you guys heard about like pranayama. So prana bindu, right? Like prana just means life force, right? So pranayama, yama means the limitation or restriction, and bindu means point. So it's just a Sanskrit word for life force and point. So he put, but there is not like a prana bindu like practice here in India, so far as I know. Just want to throw that out there.
And what just came to mind, because you talk about, of course, I mean, ancestral and even genetic memory already, this could be a huge hint. Why would I need genetic memory if I have an actual record of the past? Well,
Yeah.
And then there was another point, right? So I had heard from an acquaintance who has been, I don't know, studying with Jesuits or something, or attending some lectures, that apparently they in particular love to talk about like time-space stuff and things like that. Probably Andreas knows more about it, maybe along the lines of Tyler Deschardins. I'm not sure if he was a Jesuit officially, but it seems almost Jesuits are like the NASA of Catholicism, or however you would call it. So that's also curious.
Well, they helped start NASA. I mean, they also helped like the Atomic Space Agency begin, and you know they do a lot of they sent all the kids to school that ended up growing up to become scientists. I mean, what do you? It's kind of funny. It's like when people get upset about Freemasons, like, well, okay, it was dark and there was mud in the streets and they wanted to read books. Like, what did you want? Like, they're going to become Freemasons, right? Well, okay, this is for the big kids, you know? Like, if it's not enough just to read books, like if you want to like change the world, you want to make a dent in the universe, you know, you become a Jesuit. It's always been that way. You know, it's just the way it is. If you want to make the world a way, you know, and the way that they want to make it, the way it's a way. Like, I think David's point is relevant. Like, he's saying that this is like for humans. I mean, granted, that's a pretty big general audience, but it's still just humans. Yeah.
That's in that context.
Even in Star Wars, actually, and if you take, you know, you can break apart everyone who's ever read Dune, and you can see it for what it is. Like, Avatar is clearly inspired by Dune. It's not just that he studied Vaishnavism, you know, like James Cameron in India. Like, maybe, but I know he did acid, but I don't think that that's enough of the reason. But the same thing with racism in Star Wars. Actually, the Empire is very human-centric, because it's a reference to Dune and how and it's actually played out maybe better because you see how alien everyone else is and how they don't care. They don't care at all for anyone who's not. Everyone in the Empire is a human. You don't see all the aliens are rebels, right? All the different kinds of aliens. So that's like the extension of that idea. Like, is it really a good idea to protect only one of the species of a ecosystem, right? And I think that's the issue that kind of emerges. And also what the you know, what's the name of the worm, like this, the Sarlacc, you know, sandworm. The Sarlacc pit in Star Wars is the sandworm. The sandworms are the same thing, right? But the sandworms deserve a certain amount of respect. I think it's the thing that they're realizing is that you can't tame nature. These things are alive, and you know that plays into it as well. Is that like it's not just about the humans, right?
I want to touch on the aspect of the memory and the transmission. So there are books that from this guy's called Alf Jasinski. He was apparently a member of some light order called MOHLA in southern Germany, and he published his diaries. And he said that in their order, which is a secret order, but I was supposedly one of the light side, whatever that means, but they had a ritual that, first of all, they would seek out their members by kind of looking for signs and finding them and guiding them kind of through life until they then got in contact with them. So they had certain ways, like that is very reminiscent of what the Bene Gesserit are doing and what I just read, which, yeah, of course, that's from AI, but it's just, you know, collated from the internet. And what then would happen is they would have like every human has a physical birth, and they would have like a certain ritual, like a second birth, where they would like initiate that person when they would finally find them and do a few tests of if he was willing and if they were like in the right space. And then kind of he doesn't go into what they did, but he kind of made the point that it's not involving any blood sacrifice or anything, but it's more like energetic pranic activation or something, and then reactivate the past memories. So, and then it would like take a few years to fully that merge with that child or teen's memory of that life, and that would be very intense, and they needed guidance during their life to not go insane. And so that, to the point of like memory transition, I think that is real, and I think all the secret orders know it. I think the dark orders do it with blood, and the light orders do it with like yoga or whatever they do, right, without blood. And then they also had for the end of life over transition, they had another thing that he talked about, which was he had the small transition, what he called the physical death, which is every normal person does. And then they had something called the big transition, where you would basically, at the moment of death, you would try to be prepared and very, very aware of your body, your surroundings, your thoughts, your whole sensorium and your whole mental faculties, and try to be very aware of, so that you, at the point when your death comes, you know about it, and then you try to become extremely aware. Just when you try to stay lucid when you fall asleep and to get into the dream, like he described it, similar to that, and basically to then be in that state very positive and aware. And he said that makes it very easy for the soul not to for the memory veil not to come down too hard, and then when you're in the next life, to make the process smoother to remember, right? So, and they said in this order they had specific rituals and techniques to do these kinds of transitions very specifically, and they, and I think that is significant because these orders are probably not secret for nothing. And if we really have cycles that some people facilitate and some other people try to bridge and try to conserve knowledge through, then this is exactly the kind of artifacts and knowledge we would find on both sides. So I think it's also significant that we find the same things here in the Bene Gesserit and in our secret orders. And Andreas is smiling because he probably knows all about it.
Well, what you're saying is okay. So let me pretend like to be a Jesuit for a second. I'm gonna say something that's a lie truth really quickly, but you'll know I'm lying because I'm telling you. So the Jesuits don't believe in reincarnation. What the Jesuits believe in is metempsychosis, right? Or metempsychosis, right? I think metempsychosis. That's the Jesuit equivalent to reincarnation, right? So what they believe in is essentially what you just said. It's this idea. Well, I don't know if it's exactly the same. There's the idea of the souls going through multiple bodies kind of is a Kabbalistic idea that there's like 613 parts of the body and 613 parts of the soul. Not necessarily a Jesuit idea, but they definitely do contemplations on the soul and the migration of the soul. But the other thing is Jesuits do contemplations in general. So what you'll do is you'll imagine you're in the place of someone else. Not just in the Bible. You'll pray and you'll imagine that you're like Matthew in the Bible. But you could also like read the journals of the last Jesuit. And, what they do is like when one dies, you get their tunic if you become a new Jesuit. Like a friar, the Franciscans do this, a lot of different ones do. So you assume their role, you assume their life, and you learn all about them and you contemplate all about them. So it's an interesting thing because like to an extent what you're saying is connected to their actual practice of trying to like imagine what that person went through, have those memories. Like he wrote down his journal. So imagine I'm there that day. Kind of like Scientology, you'll go through like a Dianetics thing, like, and imagine all of the senses, because the Jesuits focus on like the 5 senses through the 6th sense, because they believe that all senses are false except for the 6th sense, because the 6th sense is empathy, awareness of other things being touched. So you imagine smell, sight, taste, and touch through all of those senses, and that's probably pretty similar, right? Because you're imprinting their memories on yourself.
Before everyone jumps in, I want to make it clear that I consider the Bene Gesserit and the Jesuit malignant organizations that have lost their way and are not in the full possession of techniques that unlock all the possibilities and potential. I think, however, there are other secret groups that have not lost their way, and they are probably have other techniques to the same end that don't require the same techniques. So just to make that sure, I'm sure that Jesuits do this and that and the other thing, but there's other groups and they use other techniques, but they probably have the same aims, but they use different techniques, right? So just to put that out there.
That's true, but I also would say that the likelihood of the Jesuits, like the CIA got the idea of wearing black from the Jesuits, right? Like to boldly know what no one else knew before. The Jesuits went around the world collecting every other religion and working with every government to conquer every other group's churches to essentially, to your point, steal all of their secrets, all of their religious secrets. So the idea that the Jesuits would have other people's religious and spiritual technology because it was stolen or otherwise, like it seems like also likely.
They do. But if you are an evil motherfucker, you cannot use certain techniques. It's just not possible. You will have certain things that are restricted from you being able to implement them. That is just the nature of reality. I mean, we can go into this until the cow comes home, but I think it's pretty self-evident. However, you are also exclusively able to do certain things that someone who's not an evil motherfucker cannot do because it is in the evil realm of experience. I mean, we don't have to talk about morally evil, but I'm just talking about imposing one's will or respecting one's will. That's where I draw the line of evil and not evil, right? We don't go into the moral aspect. So I think if let's just for argument's sake, if we draw a line between areas where certain groups might be on a certain scale, then it is pretty clear that there are different techniques that can be done on this side where it involves imposing one's will, and on this side where it involves respecting will of other people, other beings. Those are different techniques. They can still try to achieve the same aim, but they're not the same techniques, and they're different groups, and they probably have different cultures and different, patterns of interaction, language, lore, and all of that. And I think the Jesuits are just one side of the story, and we don't even see the positive side at all in Dune, I think, and that might be a big red flag, actually, that we don't see them.
No, I think it's a beautiful point about Dune, is that instead of having the sides be protagonist, antagonist, you have both sides thinking that they're the protagonist, and then the people suffering. It's like Song of Roland. Like, these are the people that are in between this battle, and both sides are not perfect, and they actually are kind of creepy, both sides to an extent. And I would say, like, Nachiketa being in India, you're seeing probably like, like, I think Vishnu, like Vaishnavism, and some of those paths, like Jainism, you can see like there's like kind of an idea for just trusting in causation. If I do this, this will happen. If I do that, that will happen. So I will do this because this is what I want to we can see there are better options, but those options look more like what people are doing in the sand on their own when they're trying to save each other. They're not the people that are vying for control,
Yeah. So I just want to say something real quick about what I'm seeing or observing, and like where we are in terms of like this timeline is concerned, is that there's a lot of programming that's happening, as we know, and the programming that's been like is just no different from Dune, like the Bene Gesserits with their secret organization, Missionaria Protectiva, right? It's the one arm of the Bene Gesserits. They've already sown the seed of Quasit Haderach will become like their messiah, because Dune, Arrakis, is the most valuable resource that they know they have. So they have to control these people. So they've sown the seed of this programming many, many, many years ago, centuries before Paul Atreides actually came into the scene, and we know now that there's a lot of programming that's happening all over the world with this falsified history, and India is not exempt at all. Like, my initial assertion about India was that, oh yes, it's ancient, it's Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then you have the Indus Valley and stuff like this. And my thinking was like, oh yes, Sanskrit and all this goes way back, way back. But that's just another iteration of the recent programming that is actually happening in real world now. That's the thing. So we have a kind of correlation with fiction and reality, and that's what we're really here to talk about, is about this Messiah programming that's happening over and over again. Like, like they offer you a hero, and then everybody gets behind it. And then what's the new version of that now? Maybe it's Trump. Back in the day when Frank was writing about this, he was actually taking notes on John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was like the kind of the model that he was talking about before, when he was around. But now, who do we have? We have Trump, and we have like the potential Mahdi that people are also whispering in the Middle Eastern countries as well. So, I mean, there's a direct correlation already, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've read Dune Messiah, right? Which is, I think, like the second or third Dune book. But that's essentially what happens, is they, after like Paul rules as emperor, he becomes the Messiah. He accepts the role of the Messiah, and he has to like try to save humanity in this giant, it's essentially a jihad to force everyone to accept him as the Messiah, So it's like people are dying everywhere and being killed to be enslaved to become, the the servants of this new religion that's kind of forming, and people are arguing over it and saying like, well, is this true? And it started out as like these were the radicals in the last book that were kind of controversial and maybe like cool, but then you see how it's forming that this is going to be a state-sponsored event. Like the state will then use this in order to calm the people and keep the peace. So it's a very Constantinian thing. Like, okay, well, yeah, we'll use the People's Rebellion as the branded state religion and everything will work out, you know. But it ends up also, this idea of the Messiah complex is interesting because it's never about what that person believed, because they want to kill that person and replace it with the branded symbolism. Like the same thing with Jesus, really. Like Jesus talked in his whole life about Jubilee, forgiveness of debts. And so what they do is they say, okay, well, now that Jesus is dead, like his blood sacrifice, that's your forgiveness of debts. But that's not what he was saying. He was saying like, societally, we should probably have a debt jubilee, because there's not a way for these generational debts to be paid. There's people that are being enslaved for generations. So, you know, the same thing is going on in Dune. They've got these people that are in a scarcity environment and they're being exploited, and there's no way to maintain the world. And they're saying, okay, well, here's the solution. We'll give you a sort of social thing to believe in that says like it'll all work out, right? And it's even Fred knows that. I mean, even Paul knows that it's not he's not really like saving anybody, but like it's the state's intention to make his religion save people, right?
Yeah, I think he believes it though. I think because like with the whole jumping of their initial plan of the Bene Gesserits, because the Quasit Haderach was supposed to come a generation afterwards, you know, because Jessica was supposed to have a female daughter, and then that daughter was supposed to mate with a Harkonnen, and then from there they were supposed to have their version of, you know, controlled Messiah, but they skipped all that thing. And then, you know, like when the seed was already sown into the consciousness of the Fremens of like, you know, like who was it? Like the Bene Gesserit's son will come, outer people from outside of Arrakis will come, and so everything fit into place already. That was already in place for them. So they just kind of leaned into it, you know. Like, I mean, who else was going to do it? Their house has already been killed off, you know. I mean, like they were already betrayed, you know. I mean, this is like kind of a meta game
but Paul
that they were already involved with.
Paul kind of realizes like if he does it, he's going to become evil. So he kind of walks out into the desert to sacrifice himself. You know, again, in a kind of another Jesus thing, he realizes like I can't just become like the king with a sword, which is another kind of thing. Like Jesus is in the Bible, it says like he came with a sword, you know, Matthew 33, right, to divide people with the sword, divide families with the sword. So instead, he goes and he sacrifices himself in this desert scenario, and that is really, I think, kind of to your point, proves he really is the Messiah because he does the right thing. But it's also like he's realizing he's not. It's kind of Neo Matrix in that moment. He's thinking, am I really going to be able to save? Is this really the way to save these people? Or am I just like didactically destroying them if I do this? And then when he tries to refuse it, that ends up making him, his sacrifice makes him actually more of a Messiah.
I want to comment on the word Messiah because we're saying it so many times. There's also already, that word has already been corrupted. For Judaism, the Mashiach is an expected political leader that will deliver people from some kind of oppression. It is not even necessarily a spiritual leader. It is mostly a political leader. And there have been some in the past. Now, I'm not super properly sourcing this. I'm just pulling this off OpenGPT here. But just three. There was Bar Kokhba in 132 CE, who led a rebellion against the Roman Empire. And then there was Shabbatai Zevi, you know, the
good old Zabbatai. Yeah, good old
let's not even get into him. If people want to,
maybe some people think he's the Messiah.
They can look him up. It's just absolutely horrible stuff. And then Jacob Frank, which it was his successor, he was also seen by some as the Messiah. And Jacob Frank is not one bit better. These are like horror figures that they were basically saying to be saved by sinning as much as possible, and they really took it to the nth degree. Anyway, that is the Messiah concept in Judaism. Is not even necessarily spiritual. It's mostly originally coming from political deliverance. So it's coming from, a worldly leader that goes against another worldly leader. It's just a big father figure.
I would okay, that's not what
second,
that's not really that's not what the word Messiah means though, right? Like Messiah means anointed one. That's what it means,
Yes, but in the Jewish, where it's coming from, Mashiach.
Aramaic. It's Aramaic.
Yeah, well, the Messiah is, I don't know, is that more the Greek?
It's Aramaic. Christ is Greek. Christ is Greek for Messiah.
I wanted to show, like, we have Judaism, Christian, and Islam who have the Messiah concept. So in Judaism, sure, I give you that point because I can't really bring up any great sources here or any great books. I don't have them at hand. And in Christianity, what happened is there were even Roman Caesars who were Christos. So that's the Greek word. And it just means the anointed one. It has nothing to do with Messiah. They conflated Messiah and Christos, where Christos means anointed one and Messiah means a political leader. So they did something really weird there, where they conflated the Hebraic Messiah, Mashiach, and the Greek Christos. And I know you don't like to hear this. I'm sorry.
No, it's just like you don't understand the context. So like the word Messiah and the word Christ or Christos is Greek or Aramaic, right? Aramaic is the spoken language of the Hebrew people. Hebrew was not really spoken. It was a dead language by that point. Sure, you could say that it meant that this was a leader, but the only reason is because of Exodus 23, where it says that to be a Christ or a Messiah, to be the anointed one is to be one of the Sadducees. You have to be a priest in the Cohen priesthood. The Cohen priesthood is actually in charge of doing the anointing and the temple sacrifices. There's 12 priesthoods, right? So one of the priesthoods makes the oil. And the oil can only be anointed on these particular rabbis who are in charge of doing the temple work, right? So yeah, it means that you're in charge because that's the only person who gets to use that oil. But it also, for them to say it means like a revolutionary figure who's going to change that's not really what it meant. It didn't mean that they were waiting for that. They did mean at certain points when they're talking about new rabbis, right? Like, so the Ebionites, right? They referred to Christ as the new rabbi because of the messianic belief that basically there were two kinds of baptisms. There's baptism by water and baptism by fire. And that if you were able to repent through baptism by water, you could prevent the baptism by fire, right? So those were the reasons that became really popular around John the Baptist and Jesus. But in general, it's not like it meant that, for the Jews, like a revolutionary figure until Zabbatai Levi. And you could even look at like Mendel Schneerson and the Chabad movement in New York City, because they do the exact same thing. They call their rabbi,
if it's not,
because he's a rabbi. Anything. He's a rabbi, and he does the anointing ritual. If you do rituals,
how can you do it?
Because you get
one rabbi. How the fuck can he just say, "Oh, I am this guy"? And there's so many other rabbis.
They follow their tradition from the Exodus of Israel into the Ashkenazi Georgia, which is granted like 11 centuries when they're converted, but they moved to New York after the pogrom, and it's descendants, but it's a presbyteros, essentially. You have the elders that then pass on, the same as the imams do with the Muslims, the same as priests did, for a long time. The difference being that rabbis continue to allow to have children, to have families, and so they were able to extend and continue to sustain. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily means like the word Christ or Messiah doesn't necessarily mean like, political leader who's going to like revolutionarily. It's not like Cesar Chavez or Che Guevara kind of thing. It's like rabbi. It's like rabbi.
The issue I have with is like we don't even know if all these books are real. Like
and most of them aren't. I would agree with you on like all of that stuff. I agree with. Yeah,
we can't even go back and see, because then we go like, oh shit, they're all fake. So
you got like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are basically made up of the Qumran documents, and like anytime that there's a quote of Jesus, they're obviously like going to the quote book and then they're copying the quote book. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. All that's, I give you all of that. But still, the idea that there was this character Yeshua who was into debt jubilee, it seems like there's enough evidence for this. There's even political problems going on in Israel at that time, at that.
So somebody was.
Do you think?
Yes, go ahead, Judge Kita.
Yeah, yeah, I was just gonna say because like we don't know what was going on during that time, like in the Middle East. It seems like a lot of the biblical stuff was actually happening in Europe, according to some sources, right? So like
Turkey, yeah.
David, David is going into like the idea that Jerusalem is not where it is now in so-called Israel, right? Jerusalem is actually in Turkey, in Istanbul, such
Not
things like
me.
this.
The
So
other. You're talking about David Young Jr.
yeah, Dave, not you, David. Sorry,
What
I
did I
want to make it clear. David Ewing Jr. has spoken about this. So again, like I do kind of subscribe to this idea that history has been altered, and we're on different timelines. They've injected like probably about 1,000 years. We don't know exactly because we got the Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar. So our calendar has been kind of messed around with, and then we're supposedly in year 2024, whatever that means. So like, could we actually really be year like 1024, or maybe year around year 1000? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, but I do think you have a few things, right? So even if you have to look at so you look at fake news, you can see it's a lie, right? You can usually do that. You can do the same thing with history. And so like Josephus is a great example, or looking at Pontius Pilate, or looking at the events in the Roman Empire during things like, okay, was there a Roman census that went down at any point like 1,000 years ago? It looks like there was. Do these countries, what happens to the state that this is supposed to be happening in, Turkey and the Canaan region? Well, they're shattered completely. The people are sent out in every direction. Do we have evidence of people being diaspora, part of this culture in different countries? Yeah, you see them in Russia, you see them in Georgia, you see them in northern and southern Europe, you see them in Africa, right? You see them all over the world. You see them in Spain, you see them in Mexico, right? Like Sephardic Jews that have gone outward. So there's a lot of evidence for there being like a thing that happened in a state, part of this sort of economic empire. And again, all that's loose because what we're calling Rome, whether it's the Byzantine Empire, which is out of Turkey or something, there's still an economic agreement. We can see these relationships that occurred, trade agreements, and you can see, okay, then these people were sent out, and that there was an economic collapse that was going on because the tabernacle, the Cohen priesthood, require these crazy taxes, which were completely destroying the people while they were under the control of this larger government. So the shattering of Israel is really important. And this political figure that is Yeshua seems really important. And the fact that what we do have him saying, like any evidence that we have of him, seems a lot more violent, actually, right? Like he's got a sword. He's talking about dividing families. He's talking about, only rendering unto Caesar what actually belongs to Caesar. These kinds of things are not what we hear later under Paul. So, David, you're completely right that they've completely changed the original message. But I still think we have enough to say there was an event, there was some sort of cataclysmic social disaster that happened, and that's what they're lying about. That's why they're still being brought up. And that the fact that it's that important, it's that relevant to us today. It's proportional.
I think that we have a whistleblower pattern happening. It's cyclical. Let me just zoom out from like, okay, I can't say either way, right? But I'm skeptical. If we take the Bene Gesserit pattern that they use on Arrakis, where they seed it, and then in a few hundred years they come back and do whatever they want because now everyone thinks they're fucking God or the Messiah or whatever. Now think about 200 years later. Well, who's going to know what happened? Nobody. They will just know what the Bene Gesserit wrote.
Except for the Bene Gesserit, they're going to know.
Except for the Bene Gesserit, but they're not going to tell anyone. And this movie is I have just watched the first half of the part 2 of the new Dune, but I hope they will go into that because it's actually the important part to the whistleblowing that they're doing. If we look back at the Jesus thing, or whether it happened 200 years, 500 years, 2,000 years, it doesn't matter because if we look at what happened in the First World War, well, according to David Ewing Jr., we don't even know what happened then. We have some photos that he is showing some strong skepticism towards and is showing evidence that they might have been staged. And, I'm skeptical towards that too, but it's just 100 years. And what do we know for certain? Well, we know for certain what the victors tell us. And everyone tells us that. So we have the social proof, the reinforcement. So as you know from advertising, if you hear it from 7 people, you believe it. So Andreas, when you said, yeah, we know for sure these things, of course, why do we know that? Because we heard it from so many different times, and we have even this correlation bias that when we hear it from 20 different places and they are all slightly variated, then we think we're piecing together a puzzle, which I like to do. And that's probably another technique. If you're seeding info and you're following this pattern, you use all these little psychological tricks, and then you have, maybe there's a cyclical messiah or political leader they will put in place, like Albert Pike said, if the crowd needs a hero, we will provide him. Maybe that is the messiah, and he whistleblowed that pattern. And it's just because why do we have the horrors and the ISIS and basically the Jesus Mary pattern repeated? I think that is just a messiah pattern that whoever is in charge uses to cyclically get back in the saddle after they've been thrown off with revolution and the slaves revolting or whatever. This is just zooming out and looking at patterns only because, like Andreas said, we cannot really be for sure about the details, but we can look at the greater patterns and how they repeat, and at least that there's more confidence in the patterns, I feel.
Yeah, but like these guys are thinking in long-term plans, like they're thinking in terms of hundreds of years, right? We don't know for how long. Maybe they can even live longer. That could also be a possibility, because like the people who are the pawns in the game, like, okay, they're out for profit, they want to become rich, and they're hired, and they get the Jesuit education or whatnot, but they don't really see the big picture for what it is. They don't really know what is actually going on. Okay, go to the Middle East, go to Egypt, go fabricate some artifacts, that's going to make you some money, right? Like back 100 years ago, 150 years ago or something. Make up a new language, go and trade and do this and do that, but the people who are at the top, who are manipulating and giving them the money, giving them those opportunities, like they know the big picture of what's going on. They know how they're going to capitalize it 50 years down the line, 100 years down the line, 200 years down the line. It's like this like COVID thing is no different. This like idea of viruses, they injected that idea in us, right? A long time ago. And then all of a sudden, we come to 2019, and then boom, we got our pandemic situation, not anything different, but they had to incrementally feed that into you, and talk about Bill Gates and viruses and all this kind of stuff. It's not it's just one little aspect of their meta game that they're playing, like change history. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, imagine if like I hated Raph. I just hated Raph so much, but Raph was popular. Like everyone loved Raph. I mean, so it's not that hard to imagine, but then I decide, okay, here's what I'm gonna do, because I run the world, by the way. I'm gonna take Raph, and I'm gonna, after he dies for his cause, we're gonna make him super famous. I know I hate him, but I'm gonna make him so famous. I'm gonna put him on t-shirts. I'm gonna make money off of it. And then as time goes on, I'm gonna change what it said that Raph said. And it'll be like, oh, well, actually, Raph said all these other things too. You didn't even see this part? No, this is where he said that you should really like Andreas, because Andreas is the cool. You should render unto Andreas what is Andreas is. It's everything. And then after like 100 years or something like that, if I'm immortal or not, I'll just change Raph's picture to my picture. I'll make all the statues pictures of me, and it'll say Raph, but then I'll have people pronounce it different. I'll be like, well, Raph is really Andreas. It's pronounced different. I mean, I don't know. It just seems so easy. You could do that. You wouldn't
just
really
to pick
have
up
that.
one example you just used, I wasn't even aware of the usage in terms of render unto Caesar's what is his. My interpretation, just without knowing much about it, would more have been like, yeah, pay all your taxes, but that it could also be seen in a way that, only do that little and don't give anything more. Even here, you can see with the same expression, it can give a completely different outlook. And then
that
you
was
give
a
100
Jesuit
years.
interpretation. My bad.
It could also mean just pay Caesar's taxes to Caesar, and our pay the taxes that we get to us.
Yeah,
like they were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They were rich in the region, and they had land, and the Romans had land, and they were working together, but there was probably also competition. So maybe that's also a context to that.
I know this is like a little sideline, but just because of that point, I think it's interesting thinking about it because, yeah, like everything could be a lie, and probably a lot of it is. But usually when you're lying about something. And if you look at Paul, and we've talked, with David Ewing Jr., we did like the cannibal video talking about early Christianity. Early Christianity did like archonic rituals, archonic Eucharist, where they drank the blood of the Christians who they didn't get along with, And so you look at the word martyr, and I always thought the word martyr meant, person who was murdered for believing in Jesus. But no, it just means witness. If you witnessed it, you were murdered. Now that's why we call it that. But that wasn't what it meant until Paul, the Apostle Paul, who never met Jesus, murdered all the witnesses. This is like a court thing, right? This is like a movie. You murder all the witnesses. Yeah. And what did Jesus say? Well, let me tell you. You know what I mean? And then just burning all the books and building all the canon and everything. It just makes it seem that much more interesting that Yeshua, like, wait, you deleted the 13 to 30 years? What happened in his? I want to know all of a sudden so much more, because so many people died. So many people were murdered about it. So many said, yeah, kill me if I can't tell you what this guy was really like. And they killed him. And then they just tell people, oh, this is what Jesus was like. He's this blonde dude who says, like, go with it. It's like hard to believe.
But yeah, your talk with David Ewing Jr. about the skulls and bones was like really one of my favorites with him, and really an eye opening and very sad. I mean, if you really look at the implication of what went on during that time, and you have all these like, the church and their allies and the businessmen who took over and basically forcibly converted everybody and murdered everybody, raped everybody. It's craziness. And then not only so, they were eating people, in mass numbers. I mean, where did all those bones come from, at these various churches? In Paris alone, in the catacombs, they got like 6 million bodies down there. I mean, that's crazy numbers if you really think about it, and that's just one location.
Yeah, all around the same, all around the same age bones too, which is like, okay, so this all happened pretty quickly.
Yep. So something happened where it was like up front, out in the open, in your face. Everybody was aware of it, and I mean, we know that shit is still going on. I mean, like, are we going to be naive and say, oh no, it's all gone, nothing like that is happening? No. We can't avert our eyes. We can't take any attention away from the fact that this stuff is actually still going on, but it's happening underneath. It's happening underground. But then, they like to say to everybody, oh no, it's just some Hollywood people, it's Abramovich, and then, she's doing her art. It's artsy, they're doing artsy stuff of like, this witch ritual magic or whatnot,
Yeah,
it's
I think
crazy. They hide right out in the open.
They're going to normalize it.
Yeah, of course.
That as it starts out being kind of in the background. You're like, oh, I kind of know that's going on, but only with that, like you said. But it's becoming more and more. Well, yeah, like, boomers want to live forever, so they're likely to try new things and give them access to plasma, and eventually, like, oh, I know somebody who does it, and then you know what I mean? It's you were talking about incremental. This is an example.
Yeah. You're muted, Raphael.
Say, yeah.
Raphael, you're muted.
It's going to be great because soon you're going to have the lab-grown plasma, so you don't need to take it from the homeless on Tenderloin anymore, or whatever they famously did.
I'm going to go over to Raph's and use all of his organic plasma.
Apparently, there's a stem cell research where you need 3 months old fetal cells for the best, stem cell plasma. And that is the reason why in 1990, all the abortion legislation went in place all over the world, because in 1998, that technique was publicly available. So there's your plasma.
Yeah, so let's try to tie this back into Dune a little bit by like talking about the spice, because when you look at the spice, it has multiple qualities to it, right? Because kind of like the adrenal thing, you get addicted. People can get addicted to it, and then people live longer when you take the spice, right? And then you have prescience, and then it's good for you. But more you take it, more addicted that you become. And then if you don't take it anymore, you actually die, and you die very painfully by taking. So it has like a multiple like things, is the spice melange. Melange means it's like assortment of things, right? So it's like kind of taking like DMT and LSD and mushrooms, and then you add the adrenochrome factor into it, and then like mixing it all together, and that's what you got, the spice, right? You can fold space with it.
Yeah, I wonder, did Frank Herbert ever meet Ken Kesey? Like, did they ever get down? Because I wonder about the like the, what do you call it, where the CIA gave everybody acid? Like the magic
Timothy
trip.
Leary.
No, but
Yeah,
Timothy Leary's East Coast. So what they did was, like, Menlo Park Research, they took everybody who wasn't, putting people in a white room who were professors and giving them LSD, really specific, so taking it out of the lab. So what they did was they told Ken Kesey, who was a ventriloquist, they're like, hey, in a Stanford gymnast and acrobat, they're like, it'll be hilarious. How about we tell him this program's over. We're done with this. And they'll leave. And they walked out of the room, but they left him in the room with all the drugs. So he took the box with the drugs, and they just followed him across the country. And for a while he thought they were, but now we have the Freedom of Information Act, so we know they were. And they just watched him in his bus as he took Americans to New York and back, and they filmed him. And it wasn't just LSD. They had IT-290, which is alpha methyltryptamine, which is the coolest, right? That's like naked lunch. That's the yellow powder it's like 12 hours of tryptamine that you're coming down from, like you're winning the lottery and just constantly, you're just constantly winning all the time and dreaming while you're awake. And the Soviet Union invented it because they were looking for, like, they had people that were starving and sad and couldn't work. So they made this drug, and then people could, like, not sleep and not eat and be happy and still work all the time. But that's I feel like, I mean, there's some about spice melange that reminds me of AMT. That's all I'm saying. It also looks like that yellow powder.
Thank you for your expertise, because I first would have connected it just with DMT, but I even forgot about the life extension factor. I mean, here with DMT, we could maybe still argue, but definitely not the addictive factor. So that's an important point too. Yeah.
Also, the
And of
long
course, seeing the
lastingness
future.
of it. It lasts a lot longer, and it's not just like brain changing. Like AMT is more like coming down from mushrooms for 12 hours. So that kind of seemed more like, and the fact that their eyes turn like Disney blue, you know what I mean? Like, that's some metaphor for certain kinds of tryptamines.
Yeah. So I mean, it's I like Frank Herbert himself was experimenting with psilocybin mushrooms. So like he was a writer for like a newspaper, and he did that, and so that was a little bit of a study
And then he
work,
had to
and he was
invent a
writing
few
some.
stories. Sorry, no, just making
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. No, but like he worked for like a magazine for a while and stuff like this. But he met a couple from California. It's like he bought some land. No, he didn't. He inherited lands through his wife. His wife, Frank Herbert's wife, is related to the Forbes. So she comes from some, I don't know, kind of like aristocrat, American aristocrat, a little bit. Yeah, and then she got land in, I think, Oregon, or no, it was like I forgot where, but they lost the land, they
Tacoma,
lost the house
Washington,
to
or
the bank.
something.
Yeah, maybe somewhere. And then, but it was like an island. They inherited land from a wife's mother, who comes from like I guess some wealth, I suppose. But they lost it to the bank, and then they had to go back to California for work. And what happened there was that they met these two couple who were into Jungian psychology. And they were like talking, and then during that time they were experimenting with psilocybin mushrooms and hash, not hash, but like marijuana and stuff like that. So he was smoking, a lot of weed and taking a lot of mushrooms during that time. So that definitely inspired him to talk about the spice in the way. Spice is kind of like cinnamon flavored mushrooms.
Well, wait a second, guys. Spice is not just nice because you live longer and it makes you see all cool shit. It is because it's a requirement for space travel.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
it's like
and prescience
an
too.
industrial commodity. Sure, people can have fun time, but they can just have some girls in a harem or whatever, a goat. But and the life extension is significant, but it's only for a very small part of people who can afford that. But the industrial component of the space travel is really affecting, it's basically propelling the whole level of society, of the whole universe forward. That's why you have the universal emperor. Otherwise you wouldn't even have that. And because he controls that, he can have that level of control. So if we want to look for an analogy, because we assume that's whistleblowing material, I think we have to look at something that is equally all-encompassing.
Yeah,
It's
I
I
mean,
mean,
not
mushrooms
just
are
for
cool and fun, but you know,
Ni-
is it spice?
1960s CIA, cocaine runs the world, right? Like the way they were destroying the Soviet Union, right? By bribing them with coke bricks, and like the Iran Contra was literally started because of 1960s in Noriega, and like, all the things that happened in South America, like the building up of Pablo Escobar through what's her name, you know, the lady, the godmother lady.
Well, I'm saying it's a fake commodity. It's not a real commodity. It only works in this fake brutalistic paradigm that they built. It's not in itself an intrinsic value because it's actually a poison, and that makes
Cocaine
you
or
work for a
spice?
little bit more, and then you know, your teeth fall out or whatever.
Yeah,
If you think about
spice is like an actual fuel. Yeah,
it's an actual fuel. I mean, you know, it's different. It's not just coke. But what I want to touch on, you know, it's not just spice. In the second movie, and won't spoil much and where it happens, but they introduce a substance of warm urine,
Mm.
and it was probably, you know, from the book, and it's like a next level thing.
like Ormus. Yeah.
It's crazy, and it transforms the Bene Gesserit, you know, the mother of Moadib, Paul. It transforms her into a you know, a matriarch.
Reverend Mother. Yeah,
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 Reverend
the
Mother.
Reverend Mother.
And then she constantly has visions, and it affects her unborn child, and the unborn child is affected. She does survive that imbibing of that substance. Normally everyone expected her to die, and she survives it, and from then on she has constant visions and communicates telepathically with her unborn child. So funny enough, she now is in the same state that Paul is in without ever having had that. So it looks like that the breeding program that the Bene Gesserit have, which has produced Paul, which should have been a female but turned out to be a male, and he has these visionary qualities, that is emulating what the worm piss does if you take it. But it is like a soft version because you can use a technique to survive it, and it's maybe painful, but the worm piss usually kills everyone. And so you have this like the naturalistic way with the Fremen to do the same thing. And you know, when we go back to this dualistic paradigm, you have like the stake your life on it, free will side of it, the white path, let's call it, for lack of a better word. And then you have the, well, we force you to do what you're in the fucking womb, the dark side, right? And to do the same thing, to see in the future, to have visions, to have the memories, and
Yeah.
you know, DMT is probably goes there. I haven't ever tried AMT, but and I don't know what adrenochrome does, but there's another thing that we don't know anything about, which is you all know about pharmakia, right? And basically all these ancient goddesses, they were all involved with pharmakia in one way or another. They were the creators of potions. They were the original apothecaries,
Apothecaries.
and because in these ancient female priesthood goddess cults, they had orgiastic sexual rituals, and you know, if you look at the whole thing, it basically comes down to sensual, experiential. You know, basically they were completely high on some kind of potion, having extreme sensual experiences. So I think that is whistleblowing what they did in these ancient cults. And if they did that thousands of years ago, 100 years ago, chances are that what we're now seeing and call it MK Ultra and whatever adrenochrome is probably just the modern iteration of that. And it's not, you know, anything new. It's just that now instead of like rubbing together menstrual blood and semen and a bunch of plants, now they do it in a lab. But the intention behind it is probably still the same, to get a human in a certain state, or get him that ability, or get him into that vision state, or maybe permanently alter him, or something like that.
So just one more parallel, superficial, but maybe still interesting. The spice, I mean, I guess the Fremen naturally imbibe it by just living there in a way, but usually it is refined, no? Because they have spice refineries, right? I think. So just also just like with the cocaine, even though of course there's coca leaves and so on, but that one of the ways to achieve that then would be a highly refined industrial process. How I guess you also get the fuel for the space navigators, or you make it into these orange clouds or something, right? And then you have, maybe compare, not really, but let's say ayahuasca or whatever, which you still maybe have to brew in the natural sense, but in Dune at least it would be naturally occurring without much, human additional intervention to make a refined substance. If spice is refined, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is.
So there's 3 classifications within Dune that are specialized. Like the Bene Gesserits are one of them. Then they're the witches who also rely on spice to give them the power of prescience, right? Then you have the Mentats as well, who also take spice because AI is outlawed in the world of Dune, right? Like the Bacterian jihad, and then AI was gotten rid of, so they rely. And anybody who had any kind of computers in the likeness of a human being was murdered. They were killed off. That was a law within their universe, right? So, and then you have the Bene Gesserits and the Mentats, and then you have the Spacing Guild, basically. So the Quasiat Tederac basically has all those abilities. So like Paul himself was being raised as a mentat by his father. He was being trained as a mentat, but by the mother he was given the Bene Gesserit training. But then after the transformation, because he also took that extra substance, later on in the movie, without too many spoilers, he gets the memories of everybody. So that's what it does, like he gets like the memories of everybody. He sees space and time. He just he's kind of like the magician in the in like Marvel universe, and he sees that one path. Out of all the different possibilities, he sees that one path that he must go through is the narrow path. So that's and death is unavoidable, unfortunately, because I mean this is the spider web that we human beings are sewing. Like we create life, and then we are like living here now, and we are programmed in a particular way, and this programming has been here already long before we were ever born. We're just starting to uncover some of it. We're just starting to come to some realization of it, but it's very heavy. And vast majority of people, unfortunately, they're under the water of like this programming that they don't know how to get out of. They cannot see themselves coming out of it. That's the thing. And so, for in Paul's perspective, he sees that as saying like you can't tell the Fremens that he's not the one. I mean, he fits that role perfectly. That time is now or never type of deal. Like otherwise, you're gonna have to let that go and let the Bene Gesserits take over and let them have their quasi Haderach or their Messiah. But he's already there, and he has to lean into the fact that he has to take advantage of this legend that's been sown to it. So that becomes like a little bit of a backfire to the Bene Gesserit plan. But a lot of people die anyways. There's a lot of suffering actually that happens during his reign as a Messiah, and his son Leto as a Messiah, because his son Leto, the God Emperor of Dune, who turns himself into like a worm hybrid of a human, and then he has more power than anybody else ever in the history of Dune universe, right? But he rules with an iron fist. He wants to push humanity down. He's worse than any other emperor that has ever come before. Though too. So that's the irony of this whole situation. People
So
want to be free. Go ahead.
From what I understand, at least if I understood Frank Herbert's intention or idea right, also with the whole, which we didn't mention yet, with I think Pardod Lead Keynes is his name, who is the planet's ecologist. So this whole idea also has kind of an eco awareness factor, let's say, in Dune, even just this whole idea of explaining the ecosystem and how it works with the water and the worms and so on. And there was another point that I just lost, but I'll come back to it in a second.
I want to touch on what you just said in terms of we are presented in the Dune movies and probably in the books with the scenario being that Paul has accidental visions while he's surrounded by secret cults of powerful mentalists. So that seems highly suspicious to me. Probably someone is sending him this shit. And it could even be his mother. Like, that's a possibility. And just 1 second before you go, Raffle, keep that thought. Another thing is, imagine if we draw parallels to our world and we go back thinking there's pharmakia rituals and the substances they had to have access to, and potions, melange, not just DMT and AMT. They may have some ancient pharmacopoeia potion where they put in DMT and menstrual blood and whatever virgin, you plant, and you can't even think about what it.
There's
Who
weed.
knows?
There's weed in the Messiah plant. In
And
the Messiah oil.
the point is, they have the recipe of the melange, the mixture, the real powerful, maybe under the full moon, whatever, right? And so they have access to that, and they don't know how to use it. Now, so I talked with Nachiketa before what I think these powerful families are. Are they hybrids? Are they aliens? Are they just narcissists, right? And there's many possibilities. But another possibility is they might just be remnants of aliens, hybrids, whatever. They might be a cargo cult, but they still have the recipe for the good shit. And that elevates them over the rest of the slaves and basically makes them like into God for a day. And I think that is also what could be read out of the Dune, let's say, whistleblowing scenario, that we don't even see normal people. Only in the very beginning in the movie, like these they're crawling around, the workers, and then we just see aristocrats, Fremen, and the Bene Gesserit, and they're all aristocrats, and they all have access to the spice. So they're all pharaoh. They're all pharaoh's nobility. We never see normal people in this movie. That's very telling, because usually when you have all these whistleblower movies, they only show their own quarrels and their own stories because they allow themselves so much. And even when they show normal people, usually it's just a metaphor for what they went through. We have seen that in many cases. And that's another possibility, that they just have access to this recipe and they just.
There's another, when you said pharmacopoeia, it reminded me, because there's another interesting word, which is terapeutica, right? Which is the therapy root word. Like pharmacy is from pharmacopoeia, therapy is from terapeutica. And the terapeutica was actually a cult of Christians, like a Coptic cult of Christians, that believed that everyone should get access to the Christ oil, the anointed one oil, because that oil in Exodus 23, it says to use cannabodin, which a lot of people believe, and at the time they were pretty sure was cannabis. And so using a hemp oil, which has, medicinal value to it. And so they were saying this should be given to everybody, particularly to the sick and to the poor. But at that point, it was only being reserved for the very healthy priests to have access to. So there's also a connection there to that idea of like liberating the common people and the sort of oppositional ideology to pharmacopoeia, which is related to it, terapeutica, therapy.
Maybe that happened before, and then they were all burned at the stake.
Yeah, witch brews, right? Any brewers,
a whistleblower movement of a subgroup of a group saying, "Hey, we want to liberate this knowledge," and they were like, "No, you're not."
Yeah.
So I really like the whole drug dealer analogy. This is also what David mentioned a few times, David Ewan Jr., in terms of how does the power structure work. And at some points he just says, well, just imagine they're like a drug dealing gang. They don't care about anything. They'll destroy any evidence. They're not even going to keep proper records. But who knows, and this is from what you guys said now, maybe they have the special mix for the melange, and maybe that's really an important word. I never thought about it so much, but probably it's a mix and special effects and special setting or whatever that maybe does something really extreme in particular. And anybody who's not familiar with other things will be like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. I'll do anything to get access to that and whatever else comes along with that structure. So I really like that idea. And the other thing, on more on a, let's say, less, or maybe in some way more superficial level, one idea I really like about Dune is that, if I understand this properly, also with the sun then becoming this god emperor of Dune, literally, and oppressing everyone, is that this actually happens also because I think he sees the golden path and actually understands that he kind of has to teach humanity, or the Fremen, or whoever is around, or the whole galactic empire, I guess, a lesson in centralization and systems theory. So basically to show them, look, if you make it all dependent on a single factor, this is really bad, and you guys shouldn't do that. And because he maybe saw that through a different way they wouldn't be able to learn it, he's kind of like, how should I say, playing the ultimate oppressor role to wean off the galaxy off of this concept for good. And at least in the story, it works out, because then they manage to survive. Maybe they become more resilient. Maybe, you know, God forbid, they become more of critical thinkers or whatever it would require. But the society at large, or the life, can actually continue because of this lesson he has given them. From that point of view, I could also, I could empathize with certain, let's say, tyrants on this world, although I don't think that that's their actual MO.
Yeah,
What
it's difficult to say, because you can always see something positive about the certain kind of action. I mean, it's like kind of as a Stockholm syndrome type of situation. It's just that the people who are there, the Fremen, they were desperate, and they're willing to believe in Paul Atreides, and then he gave them what they wanted. But terraforming Arrakis into a green planet killed all the worms, and then that also in turn killed all the spice, which everybody was relying on anyway. So like the whole idea of securing Dune, securing Arrakis, is that people have access to this plant or this spice that everybody was addicted to. Everybody needed it. It was the most valuable thing. A suitcase full of spice, they say, is more than enough to buy a planet. That's what they were saying.
I want to touch on, Rafa, what you said with the drug gang, and going back to when we said the Bene Gesserit are looking to access past and future knowledge, and maybe there's a lot of evidence that secret orders in our world are doing that or trying to do that. Imagine you are a gang and you have a technique to remember the past and the future. Then you don't need to keep any records. It puts you in a unique position to be able to completely freely fabricate whatever you want, and you will always be able to consult with the truth. You just drink your potion and then you remember. You go tripping out, you have some secretary sit beside you, take some notes, you ask your questions, and then how was that thing again? It was like that. It's like tapping into the Akashic records or whatever. And that would be a unique position if it did work like that. And another thought that came up is the Fremen are like, or it could also be seen as an analogy to the free man, as an analogy to a human who lives free in their environment, because living in their environment in harmony, although they are threatened from the outside, gives them unique abilities and visions. I mean, basically, they have already achieved what all the other parties are trying to achieve with force. They have achieved the same thing by living in balance, which is another polarity that he opens up in the story to show, like, okay, look, these guys are just living like that. They don't even know any other way, and everyone else is just coming in there and brutally trying to grab that. Just like if you ask any fish about water, he'll just look at you and be like, I don't understand. If a fish is over there, I can feel it. What are you talking about? Separation, right?
I think there's also there's two things going on with the idea. Like, one, he has to explain that Arrakis can't just be controlled. It would make a lot of sense to think that this lore was just superstition, that they're saying that Arrakis can't, that these worms are hydrophobic, because it's a perfect situation if you have a monopoly on a scarcity product, right? Like, you don't actually want this to change. This is a good thing. But then you also have to think that if the worms could be modified in some way to do that, like they would have done that in the story. So they're saying this is something in nature that you have to live with. You can't kill the golden goose. Like, please understand, when you try to terraform the Sahara Desert, like what you're going to do to nature.
Yeah, yeah. I just think that like the lesson that I'm getting from like the whole Dune thing is that people want control. And they want absolute control. But it's always fleeting, like the whole idea of Bene Gesserits wanting to create this Messiah, their version of it, it backfired on them, and then the Fremens though too, they want to have control of Arrakis. They're there, they're the native of that land, and they don't want to live in the dune, sandy, no water place anymore. They want, like what do they want? They want a green paradise. That's what they want. And that's what is promised to them. Their leader, right, Paul, is telling them to which direction are you going to be pointing us to? Green paradise, and everybody says yes. That's all, But like with all of that, that's an idea of control that they have. But at the end of the day, it backfires on everybody. Fremen are actually not happy after the whole jihad. Everybody dies anyway. All the houses, a lot of people die. Okay, they go under the control of Paul, and then he has twin children who Leto and somebody else, and then they control the throne of Dune and such. But then like the Fremen themselves come to the realization that they're not happy with this. It's just the perceived happiness. It's like this constant idea of promise that's given to people is like, okay, if we just get this, then we're set, and then we are never going to get it anyway. Like you're there, and then this is not what I expected. you know
That sounds like the Emperor is playing everyone by their desires. I guess I have to read the books to understand the role of the Emperor more. In the movie, he's more like a gray eminence. But I wonder, like, when you say, and that makes a lot of sense what you just said, like everyone is just following their utopian desires and everyone's playing everyone else, with depending on how much they know about the other faction's desires, and using that for leverage and political and intrigue. And then I wonder, what is the Emperor's aims? Raphael spoke to that, but I wonder what's your guys' takes on that.
I like that idea of just the chiseling of nature. Like you guys want to build a box. I want to build that box. He wants to build this box. Everyone wants to build a different box. And you're in this perfect expression of chaos, which is constant sandstorms,
Yeah. Go ahead, Raphael.
Was David, was a question in regards to the motive of the Emperor? I'm not sure how much is given there. All I just want to point out again the superficialities. So the Emperor is called Padishah Emperor, which makes it sound, well, at least, well, I want to say Iranian or whatever, yeah, but Shah, I mean, from the modern way, but also Eastern. As you had mentioned initially, the Butlerian jihad against AI, of course, AI is 19. In the Dune universe, at least according to the wiki they have, their world or whatever life started 19,000 BC. So there is also some confluence of the 19s going on. And of course, we have very simply, the country people, let's say the Fremen, and eventually they're lured into the city, into Babylon, into the pharaonic system by the promise of an easier, more comfortable life, a nicer environment, which in some ways understandable, but also shows the potential pitfalls going that route. And of course, what was their original religion? The original religion, they were the Sen Sunni wanderers. Sen Sunni wanderers. So again, here we have at least some kind of a Sunni connection, which then again could refer to the original Essenes, which would be the original Christians and Muslims, depending on how you want to label them.
I like that. Like the name also is like Shaddam. It's like Saddam, so it's like Saddam.
Yeah, even here. Yeah. And also
Emperor, also Carino, because Carino is like, it kind of almost sounds Italian, but I guess it means son of Thor. I just looked it up while you were saying it, so that's kind of interesting too.
So these are then more the present day references, but I could imagine that Dune contains both ideas from before the last reset, or explaining what happened there, but also if you just look at the years, just like you said, right before and even after Dune was written, when I first came across it, it was like, wow, many of the stories here remind me of what's going on with Libya. Like someone who wants to create a gold-backed currency, again, a very original Essene idea, yeah. You have him wanting to make the Great Man-Made River Project, having these huge water aquifers, which also appear in Dune, where they're collecting all the water there. Many more things, which some can be interpretation because I've never been to Libya.
Dude, I was just looking into Libya because I love Gaddafi because I'm like a Californian lefty. But like then I went
to listen to his speech in front of the Arab Union. It's one of the most interesting ones.
The dinar. He wanted to create a dinar, you know, the African dinar, right? And then Saddam means he who confronts is the name for Saddam. Yeah, the one who collides, the one who frequently causes collision. You know, so I mean, it fits the name of the emperor well as well, because he is putting the Harkonnens, who is the arch enemy of the Atreides, you know, and so he's colliding them, and he is, you know, forcing them to conflict with each other, right?
And
to take advantage of both of their
this like the kind of pagan, you know, son of Thor, kind of pagan, you know, holy name. But yeah, Libya before Gaddafi was really based too. See, that's the thing that's really conflicting, because like it's real, like Gaddafi made Libya more free, but before Gaddafi, Libya had, again, like pop stars and like Chevy Novas and Americanism and that like brutal colonialism with yo-yos and Coca-Cola. So it's conflicting. It's like, wow, look at how like Libya could have looked just like Minnesota if they wanted it to, but they decided they didn't want that, right? And I think that also speaks to exactly what Dune is saying. Like, they don't really want any of these people to win. They're just the people of the planet, you know?
I want to touch on that. We seem to get into the territory of different factions among the pharaonic nobility. So far, we have looked at the factions of the people and the nobility or the aristocracy. That is apparent in Dune, and that's apparent in our world. And we usually don't really are able to look into more factions than, oh, these are above us, or they are with us, or we are, you know. And there's this guy called Sean Ross, who is part of the pharaonic nobility, and he has kind of denounced them and has become a whistleblower now. He's now basically homeless and on the run, making videos out of his tent, exiled from Switzerland. And he has made this, he explained that the pharaonic factions, just like in Dune, we have the houses, right? We have in Dune, we have this like the four houses. I mean, at least in Dune 2, that's the computer game we had like the Harkonnen, the Atreides, the green ones.
I think the green one is not Ordos.
The Ordos.
Right? I think they are non-canon or something, but yeah,
supposedly
it would be
that makes more sense. We're blue and red
because they're like Brian Herbert, his son did it, right? It's like it's still in the books, but it's like his son's book.
Okay. Well, okay, yeah. Non-canon. That's no bother with that.
It's still pretty canon. It's all right.
It's just a childhood memory for me. It was like the precursor to Command and Conquer. Anyway, we have these even in the aristocracy, we have the factions where you would think they're already in power. What are they fucking fighting for? Well, according to Sean Ross, they're fighting for how they rule over the slaves. The one faction is the Republican faction, who wants to rule by parliamentary congregation, right? Like many voices and a lot of palaver. And a lot of narcissistic, blah, blah, I say this, blah, blah, I say that. And the other faction is the royalist faction, which is God Emperor system. And now, interestingly, you don't really have that in Dune, because you have the Galactic Emperor, and you just have the Brutalist house and the nice house, the fair house of Atreides, which is all about the values and the honor and all, and then you have Brutalist Harkonnen. And then Sean Ross describes in our world, it's more like they're both assholes, and they both think only they are fit to rule, and we need a ruler. And to an extent, at this point, this is true, right? Because they were so broken down. We're at birth, we're like, the whole process how we come into this world is so destructive to all our faculties of self-determination and self-esteem that of course we're broken when we're in this world, and we have school and injections and all these things, and make sure, yes, we are have a difficult time governing our own lives, but we have these two factions that he describes, the Republicanists and the Royalists. and they even fight. So that's why you have this weird situation of Germany in the Second World War, which was monarchy. They were moving towards a parliamentary monarchy, but they're pretty much, Prussia, they were pretty much monarchist. And then you have Japan, which is all
not as
royalist.
monarchist as like Britain or Russia or the oligarchical United
Well, I
States.
know they
but-
had them.
all right on there, or Japan, or there was like
Well, the
actually
German
the
Emperor.
only democratic elected.
There's no
state
discussion
in
that there was a
the
German
20th century.
emperor, and there was the Ottoman
Yeah,
emperor,
but
and there was
the
the
only
Austrian
democratic,
emperor,
the
and they
only
were all.
democratically elected one in the entire 20th century.
Yeah, sure, but where did that line come from? And also, maybe that's just a cool story, bro. Like we ran into this issue we had before, right? And then why does Germany ally with Japan, which also accidentally a monarchy, on the other side of the planet? Maybe they're in the same faction. Well, I'm just saying, Sean Ross made a video just yesterday explaining why is
Yes.
North and South Vietnam divided, or where it was East and West Germany. And he's saying, well, that's the Republicanists and the Royalist Pharaoh factions, just like you have
Yep.
Ukraine allying with Israel, which is also Republicanist, and Russia being more Royalist. And you have the whole of the West, which is the Republicanists you can basically see as the Masons, which invented in France this whole parliamentary system of like, let's have many voices. And it's like what we call the West, according to him. And then you have more on the East, you have basically the global caliphate, what David Jung Jr. also mentions, and what we call the East. It's more like the royalists, the caliphate, the global caliphate, and the East is the republicanist, the democracy, right? But in the end, he's just making the point like, guys, the wars will never end. These guys are not making a republic for you, they're making the republic for them. And the republic will just be a technocratic dystopia as the monarchy, because they both have access to robots and AI and all that shit. So if you don't want to become eternal slaves wherever you live, you have to stop the horizontal wars, slaves of this ruler against that ruler, just because you were told some stories. And you have to look into horizontally, pushing back
vertical. Yeah.
Vertical, pushing back on being ruled instead of horizontally just following the next bullshit story. Oh, now we're against this country. Now we're against that country. We support that. Free that country. That country. No, these are just the pharaohs fighting amongst each other, and they tell us some stories, so we run and fight their wars. And that is something that in June, just to bring it back, seemingly the emperor does. When you have this little scene where he's like moving the chess pieces around, and his daughter is distraught how he just sacrificed all of the House Atreides that they were actually friendly with for the Harkonnen. And you just see it like, yeah, and in June, that's a person, as a personified system, as a person, as the God Emperor of the universe. But in our world, maybe it's just a class of people who are in two factions. That's
my concern. Is like, if that's what one small group is doing, fighting amongst themselves, the idea of a broader group, like an entire populace fighting amongst themselves, seems probably an example worse, right? Because you can think of the British Commonwealth under Cromwell, and how basically, because in a democracy, there's no rights, because all rights are subject to the discussion of the majority rule. So there's no self-determination in a true democracy, because you have no sovereignty. You have to give up sovereignty to allow for democratic processes. So I think it's a good distinction to make, that like the most dictatorship-led country, if you're saying Germany is this, it's interesting that it came through democratic processes to get to that point. Democratic processes seem far more dangerous, even to the point that the Commonwealth was abandoned and they begged Charles II to come back from Amsterdam to rule England, because they're like, please, just like promise us you'll let us have freedom of speech or something, because we can't have that in a democracy.
But then again, if it is this false dichotomy between, I was thinking of the Freemasons, black and white checkerboard floor, right?
exactly,
It's probably
yeah.
these two groups. Of course, it's already a false dichotomy. And then it's always great, because whoever is, it doesn't even matter which of the groups administrates the population, they will most likely be fed up very soon. and then they will clamor for something else. And because of lack of another model, just like, for example, many individuals maybe that would be, let's just say it in general, dissident or not 100% agreeing with their own government, quite often would find, oh, maybe, over there on the other side of the country, they have a system that's better, or it looks, usually from the outside, it looks better, right? But then usually when you're inside and you know about it, I'm even now just learning about it. Almost in every country, there is very strange laws about whatever you're not allowed to say in this way or that way. In Russia, you have to be careful if you call it an operation or whatever, all of these things. But in any ways, the population will be fed up. They'll look for something new, but the only other thing that's offered is just the other gang. And that's also why then ultimately, even though they seem to fight and attack each other and of course kill off each other's soldiers, in the end, they always have a good laugh and meet and they shake hands, and it's not so bad, not such a big deal, because the ideological difference anyhow is just a play, or maybe even honest, but they are still part of a group. Just like in a parliament, you could say they argue against each other, but they're still all gonna make sure that they're gonna keep being fed by it, and whatever else is there. So they have
you can't get into
itself.
parliament if you're not, like, try getting into parliament or politics or above the glass ceiling of any powerful organization. You're not going to get there if you're not part of the family already. You look up any of these people, they all are related in one way or another to some powerful bloodline. Like in that case, it's not a problem. Democracy is not a threat to that system, because you're not going to get into parliament to talk about your ideas. You have the AfD in Germany. Yeah, well, look them up. They are all in family, and they, so it's like Raphael said, it's like a forced economy. It's black and white checkerboard floor. And most people are not even aware of that dichotomy. Most people think it's us against them. It's down, like it's us slaves against the other slaves, and they conflate the slaves with the rulers. So they're like us against the Russians, when the Russian government makes the Russian people do something or say something, and then they're, it's like, it's completely messed up. And when in reality, we should just realize that it's us people against our rulers, and the people over there, they might be talking some stupid shit and doing some stupid things. And yes, there's a lot of stupid shit happening that people do all around the world because they've been told stupid shit by the rulers, and they're responsible for that. Sure. And some rulers tell people more stupid shit, so these people do more stupid shit. And in some places that has even seeped into cultural habits and of cruelty and brutality. And, we don't have to go into details here, know what I'm talking about. It's all around the world. But nonetheless, the bigger problem is that these people don't just invent that shit. They've been told that as a means of control, to keep them in check. And if push comes to shoves, to be able to sacrifice them as a punishment. You just throw them under the bus for the approaching army and say, look, these guys have been so evil. Yeah, let's crush that country. Meanwhile, the aristocrats flee, and the country is bombed to the ground. Right? That sound familiar?
Should we terraform Arrakis? I mean, if all the worms die and there's no more spice, then there's nothing left for, ableism. There's no group that can exploit it. There's nothing to exploit. Should we just destroy the benefits that we have so that, there's nothing left? I mean, it's already a desert, but wouldn't we be happier without it?
No, but it comes down to communication with people we don't like. And they don't like us because we've been told shit that is partly true, and they've been, it's true because they did stuff that they were told. So it's totally fucked up. And like what you said about monarchy in Germany, that's very interesting. I think there's something happened there because Germany, there's the German naturalist movement, the natural health movement in Germany that happened. Even the forest management came out of Germany at the beginning of last 1900s. How to sustainably manage forests? The naturalist movement, the natural health movement, veganism, natural hygiene, all came out of Germany, and even the German thought and a whole.
I would say yoga came out of Germany, like westernized yoga, like the Western.
Yeah, like that's exactly. There's so many things that happen. So it seems like either there was a whistleblower movement happening out of the monarchy that they decided to share some knowledge, or I don't know what happened, but it seems something happened that someone wanted to put a stop to. So, like you say, it was monarchy, and then some flourishing happened. Like the desert was blooming, and then a few decades later, it razed to the ground in a firestorm. And what the fuck happened? I don't know, but it is a very weird anomaly that even to this day, it is held down as if people know there's seeds in the ground. If you let any rain touch the ground in Germany, it will flourish again. It's very weird. I'm just I'm
really real.
passionate about
Really
it because I'm from there, and I've been wondering for that for so long. I feel that seed. I just don't know what it is, and I'm trying to get water on it all the time.
It's really real. That's absolutely true. That's totally my feeling about what the world does in making Germany pay for most of the debts of Europe for the last, on purpose. It's definitely it's an amazing plan. But you've probably seen who's the guy from Taiwan who does videos about Japan? I'm trying to remember his name now. It's like
the guy from where?
He's from Taiwan, but he does videos about how Japan won the war.
Oh, you mean Douglas Dietrich?
Douglas Dietrich, right? Have you seen Douglas Dietrich's videos? So there's some pretty, go do what you can with a 12-hour Douglas Dietrich video where he's on crystal methamphetamine.
No, if you go on Popular, there's 2-3 interviews which are manageable because it's actually in a one-on-one conversation.
There's some pretty seriously good information some of the time because he was involved with, like, his dad worked with the U.S. military with Michael Aquino and everything, and they talk a lot about Germany and Japan in the war, and essentially the Japan won the war, and whomever was involved with the Thule Society that kind of left Germany in the process to go wherever, if we're talking about Hyperborea or the ice wall or any of that stuff, I don't know. But there's some interesting, who's to say at this point what's going on? And but there's a lot of evidence that Japan never surrendered during the war. They didn't give up their samurai swords. They used a fake American flag. They didn't follow any of their own treaty traditions when they said they surrendered. So there's evidence Japan didn't really lose the war, and that we've kind of just been, using optics to hide that fact.
And so just because you bring that up, and for some reason I recently saw that clip again, maybe you're familiar with Benjamin Fulford, who's become somewhat popular and then potentially, at least also as to what David Ewing Jr. told me, pretty soon started fabulating about different groups and background societies that may not actually exist in the way he's portraying them. However, he said, and there's, I think, even a clip of this, where he was confronting the ex-Japanese finance minister 10-15 years ago as to why back then, so this maybe would have been around 2010 or something, they gave over control of their banking and financial system to some group of Europeans and Americans, and supposedly the finance minister told them, well, we were threatened with an earthquake. And only a few days later, there was some earthquake in, I'm going to say it wrong now, somewhere. And then a few days after that, it was the Fukushima thing. So this, of course, goes back, harping
was it the Pakistan
on the
one?
whole topic.
There was the Pakistan one that was crazy. It was like after 5,000 years,
Have you seen Benjamin Fulford's interviewing David Rockefeller? And he was he was coming out and talking about, like, there's going to be 10,000 ninja assassins who's going to go around and start, taking heads from all these politicians. And the triad is going to be involved with all this. And then it's going to change the whole world, It's like, what? And everybody's like riding on this, 10,000 ninjas, just going to be riding around in motorcycles, chopping heads off here and there. And then nothing ever happened.
Well, I mean, okay, so that's the other thing I was going to say. By the way, David, have you ever been to Paraguay?
No.
Okay, so we're gonna go. Meet me in Philadelphia on Hindenburg Avenue someday in Paraguay, and we'll talk about planting seeds sometime.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea of the Yakuza in South America, man, is hyper real, and it's amazing. Like you go to Brazil and you go to Peru, it's like the stability comes from the Yakuza. Like there's no other way that like Peru runs. You'll see graffiti on the wall that says Fuji Marismo. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to understand that we're not always seeing like who runs the world and where they run the world. And South America is a major place for like the banana republic kind of American corporatism. Like when we moved out of the United States, and Swiss money, Nestle, you know what I mean, is in Paraguay. I think one of the biggest ownerships of a water reserve, in Paraguay is owned by Nestle. So there's a lot of examples, I think, of where we're like, oh, well, no one got killed up here, but then like people in Argentina, or like people getting their heads cut off with katanas in this 8-9 million person world, way more common than you think.
You mentioned Swiss, and I think they have a joker position, just to round out my two side story, because it has a big hole, and it is Switzerland, because there's like these places that we call tax havens. And what it means is you can go there. Well, I don't know what it means, but my understanding is it means that you can go there, whatever you belong to, the Republicanist or Royalist, and put your eggs in the basket, and they're safe. So, and I think it's like a bunch of islands. Switzerland, definitely, there's a reason why there's all the banks and all the gold, so it's there. And then you have like Dubai or Qatar.
Well, taxation is theft, so good for Switzerland. But it comes from the Crusade law, right?
Sure, it's theft, but what if you're the thief? You have to bring your stuff somewhere where the people who you stole it from can't get it. So that's what I'm talking about.
Well, they invented a thing called it was Saxon trust law. So during the Crusades, they said, okay, you're going to go off and fight in the Crusades. You might not come back. Just have me hold on to your land. And what'll happen is when you come back, you can have your land back, but I'll just collect the fruit off of the land while you're gone for the next 5-10 years while you're doing your crusade thing. So Saxon law, and especially in Zurich, that became a thing of asset control. Like who's watching which piece of property while people are gone, and who ends up owning the inheritance or the claim of that, which led to the enclosure movement, where a lot of people lost their land because they didn't have the evidence that they own their farms anymore.
Yeah, if you have power, you're not going to let it go. Yeah,
the Swiss scam, yeah. But also the Swiss who guards the Vatican, right? The Swiss. So a lot going on with the World Bank,
Yeah. Military order.
I mean, it's one of the arms, right? Like you got the Vatican, the City of London, and you got the Washington D.C., right? The three city states. They're just the different arms of the same faction, right? And
but the Vatican Guard is the Swiss, and it's interesting because the Swiss don't fight in wars, but they do freaking protect the Vatican Bank and the Pope.
Yep.
But
also makes sense. David, you would never have to fight in any war if anyhow by proxy they control all armies in the world. I mean,
that's pretty wild, right? They're like the final.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the final boss. But David Ewing was telling me that the Vatican actually is just an office. Yeah, it's just an office. The actual the Pope is actually operating out of Switzerland. So I mean that's the whole reason. And I didn't know this before because I thought that was like okay, Rome, Vatican City. They have their own language. It's Latin and stuff like this. But it's just an like an office.
More people
speak Latin for tourist money.
More people speak Latin in the home in Switzerland than in any other country. I think it's like 8,000 homes at least, or something to that effect, that speak Latin in the homes. It's crazy, and you've got a very large.
They have their own language, but they have their own language. There's like an elite language, which is like a mixture of Italian, German, and French that nobody seems to understand. They just like take all these words together and they mix it up, and then they got their own. And only like 10,000 people in the world understand this language. Is that true, David? I mean, you live over there, David. So can you tell us a little bit?
I wouldn't know. I can tell you.
I believe you're talking about the Romansh language, which would have 40,000 speakers worldwide.
Yeah, something like that. It's like within 5 figures. I mean, like that's nothing. I mean, 50,000 people. Okay, let's give them 10,000 more. That's like for a language, 50,000 people only understand. It's like a small portion. of the world, like only it's an elite language,
Oh,
right? And we know that all these languages.
Interesting. Sorry, I never knew about
Yeah,
this. It's like a Gaelic.
yeah. No, yeah,
It's either that
it's a
one or
language
the
for them.
Retro-Romantic, but there's a few like very particular ones which are not French, not German, not Swiss German, and not Italian. There's like super
Yeah.
small variants that are distinct.
Recognized as a
let me,
national language since 1938. Okay, so it's wow, what an interesting thing. So it's like a
even newly
Gaelic
created,
Latin.
maybe.
Yeah, God only knows. All right. Well, this is
But
called
these guys are like,
Romansh. Yeah.
yeah, but these guys are like master of languages. The whole Jesuits, that I mean, they're the ones who are the masters of printing presses. You have to learn multiple. They're the ones who created the languages. They created German, they created Latin, they created Hebrew, they created all these languages according to David. And I think so too. I mean, like I used to think that Sanskrit was like ancient and like it was one of the first languages, but he is basically showing us that it's not no more than a couple hundred years old, and a lot of these languages are no more than 100, 200 years old, really, according to him. And I think there's merit to what he is saying. In my David Ewing Jr.
There's certainly merit. I would say Sanskrit's probably way more complicated, because if you look at Sanskrit just from a mathematical perspective, it's such a complicated and interesting language. And like in the Rig Vedas, there are 500-page courses on how to have perfect syllogisms and grammar. So it's a bit more complicated than to say, okay, well, this was just invented recently, because regardless of when it was invented, it's objectively a perfect language. It's hard to say, that Arabic is a perfect language. Arabic's a really interesting language, but Arabic's a very fluid, plastic language, and that's also proved by David Ewing Jr. that things have changed over the thousands of years. The symbols, the script, everything else. Of course, that's the same with Sanskrit, that the script is a very new phenomenon. The script didn't exist for a long time. But that also, I don't know if you looked into the Bach saga, but this idea of sounds and phonemes and the construction of sounds, Sanskrit's built on this concept. So to me, it's hard to say, okay, well, Sanskrit, it's just because it's synthetic, we should stop caring about it. I still think it's something that needs to be really deeply studied. I think Sanskrit's still one of the most important things there ever was.
Well,
no, I mean, like yeah, go ahead, David. Go ahead.
If we zoom out, and I'm trying to bring this all together where we are right now. If we zoom out and we say, okay, we have all these factions around the world of like their nobility, little islands. These guys like to rule their slaves in a Republican way, arguing about it. And these guys like to just say what they should do to their slaves. They're like royalty, okay? And they come together in Davos, skiing in the big, world gathering of all the pharaohs, and they like each other, because why would they fight over how they rule their slaves? I don't care how Peter rules his slaves or Sabrina rules her slaves. I mean, sure, we play this game where we let our slaves fight against each other, but not a problem. It's not a problem between us. It's just more like ego. Hey, I killed more of your slaves. Ha ha, right? So you have that going on. And then about the languages, I'm like, I have this hobby. I like making my slaves do little inscriptions on old buildings. That's my hobby over here in Iran. I like that. And I'm here over in India. My hobby is having my slaves invent fucking languages, or even I invent the language and I just speak them, and I like that. And that's my ancestry line is just mathematically inclined, and we like to combine language and mathematics, and so we do fucking interesting stuff. And then whenever we come to Davos for the yearly She meetup, I can brag about it, right? So think about that. And then that has been going on for maybe hundreds and thousands of years, I don't know. And in that way, you could have, this place has some crap language, but great inscriptions on the stones. And this other place has an amazing language that is mathematically consistent, but only some mud huts. And maybe this other place has both. And the next place has just deserts and a guy who thinks he's the big shot. Or, it comes like there's like a personality to family lines. Even sometimes you have crazy people, but you have also something that is you don't have only biological genetics, you have cultural and familial genetics, and you maybe have even morphogenetic or semantic or mental, however you want to call that. You pass on your ideas, right? Either you orally pass them on. Memetics, exactly. Thank you. And or you write them down and you show them to the family library and you show what the ancestors did. So you have that whole trajectory and stream going on, and then you have systems of groups everywhere that have their own of these streams going on, which makes for a rich tapestry and fabric of each of their own cultures going on. That we might be able to see some of that as the slaves, right? But we can't really, don't have much insight into it. And there's a lot of things that could possibly come out of that, which we then call, the language developed because these slaves moved there. Yeah, but was it really because of them, or?
No, yeah, like Raph, what is the guy you always talk about? The school, the school of language guy.
Oh, Berlitz.
The Berlitz School of Language. Because, go ahead, explain that really quickly. Sorry.
Okay, so just in terms of family connections, so the original guy was Charles Berlitz or Berlitz. He was in about 1890 the original founder of the first and biggest language school. They have offices in many cities, even in Vienna. Probably you've seen the logo somewhere if you're in a somewhat modern or industrialized country. And it's just interesting that it would just spring up right around 1890. And of course, he immediately became the most famous and important and whatever. And that what one dear friend of mine suggested was that, well, maybe it wasn't a language school, how should I say, to learn existing languages of populations, but this could have equally just been the exporting tool to be like, okay, now we got these languages, we're going to open up these schools everywhere because they have the immersion technique, which means that you're going to be immersed in the language so you can learn it very quickly. So this could technically mean, especially if you have linguistically inclined professionals already, Jesuits or whatever it would be, they may well even be able to learn a language within a few months or something, and then potentially even implant that upon an orphanage or however you would.
Let's think about Latin, like a Latin mass really quickly in terms of immersion, and just understand like how clearly immersion comes from Jesuit training of Latin, right? So immersion, yeah.
Right, and then the really curious thing is then 2 generations later, you have Maximilian Berlitz, who strangely enough then was the guy popularizing the Roswell story and writing about Atlantis. So if I then just look at the family line, these are books I would look at with an especially critical eye, and also look at whether they could actually be important progenitors of the whole current day Atlantis and whatever else memes. And it may well be this has equally just been planted, in this case by the same family, just as they first, let's say, make up and export languages for confusion and good business in the long run. I could equally export a Roswell story, Atlantis story, whatever, my version of it, and make sure I'm going to make money for it for decades, because this is something that's still being made money off of now. Again, not saying the stories must be completely wrong or there cannot be different languages, but if you look at this evidence, it's just likely that this has been heavily.
By the way, have you read any German from like 1870 or 1830? Like, do you know how crazy different German from 1870 and 1830 is from 1890? And how like it's completely a new. And in Austria, Vienna was like Tijuana or Paris, or I don't know what you like. It's like city that people from all over Europe and the world went to because it was cheap, dirty, old, and fun. And so people were like from Hungary and from Croatia and Russia and everything, France, and they were all going, and they had to learn how to speak what became Viennese. But modern Viennese emerged right at the same time as this Berlitzer school. So we're seeing examples of that. The same thing with the Jesuits with Latin, but every example, everywhere you go, any monastery in England, every accent is when someone speaks, you know what school they went to, right? That's what that accent means. Unless they speak in that really poor accent, which means they're a native. It means they're actually an indigenous British person, right?
Yorkshire.
Yeah. But otherwise you were trained to speak a certain way. So that's also like a blueprint.
It's like a badge of identification for the slaves.
Exactly.
But Old English, is unrecognizable though too. I mean, and like
Yeah,
the Old German.
but not in the so Old English, like in the 1030s, but Old German in the 1870s. So we're talking about like 10 years.
Yeah.
Boom. Like
Yeah, within 10
completely.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it was very recently.
And David Ewing Jr. was showing basically from one of his books is that how Old German was very much closely related to Arabic as well. There's a lot of correlation between Arabic, Old German, and then it became more Germanized. And then it's like and then there's a kind of a distinction between like the modern German versus Old German, and the Old German was much closer to the Arabic languages. So there could, if you imagine like the whole of Europe, if everybody spoke Arabic, I mean, like people could have different dialects. People could
Absolutely.
speak it with a different
But
accent for sure.
German was like so many different dialects, and also German was spoken more in France, French was spoken more in Germany. Like things were, like, the tribes were in different places. But Europe, Arabia, when you start to see the connections, the main thing that's a complete giveaway is Spain, because Spain was completely fluid in terms of Arabic and the Mozarabs speaking Arabic. But as you look, you'll find in Portugal, clearly the royal families were associated. So there's Arabic going, and then of course Germany, you've got the Germany and Holland, because Holland was controlled by Spain. So anything in the region of Holland, all of a sudden you've got proximity. But you'll also find again Sanskrit, right? So if you say mein Namen, like my name is in German, you could say Mama Nama S, right? Bhavatahanamakim, Mama Nama S Andreas, right? So they're very similar, I think. Do you disagree, Raf? Do you think it's a modern German?
No,
or
no. It's most likely it's the way you're saying it. It's just so ridiculous as a German native speaker to then suddenly imagine, whatever they supposedly spoke in India whenever is supposedly the same or very similar. I mean, it just gets
Mama Nam, it makes more sense. Like the thing is, German doesn't make a lot of sense. Like to make fun of German, it is a weird language. I love it, but whenever I'm looking at your grammar, I'm like, what is going on? Your windows are feminine, but your girls are neuter. I don't know what.
I mean, especially if you now, I mean, with English, you could make many arguments too, even though I'm not so deep into it. But even just looking at that, you could understand your frustration with learning either your own and especially foreign languages in school or wherever. This was deliberate. I mean, this is deliberate obfuscation.
Except for
make everything.
Except for in Sanskrit. Yeah. In Sanskrit, there's none of that. Sanskrit, you know what I mean? Like you could read the Panini, right? The Paninis, there are rules, like in some languages there are rules like don't kill your best friend and don't have sex with his wife. In Sanskrit, there's like, you don't use this vowel preposition form, or like you have to follow the rules. And so there's no way that there's no circumstance in Sanskrit where someone's going to misunderstand you. I could have never heard the words you're using before, and you construct new words for me, and I will know what you're saying. That is incredible.
They claim quite a few similar of those attributes you seem to mention now for Hungarian. So maybe you want to look into that, where they also say you can say things, and especially you can string things together like eternally.
Hungarian and Finnish and Ugaric languages. Tamil has some of these qualities too. Bach Saga, bro. We got to look into the Bach Saga more.
I mean,
Hungarian is supposed to be one of the most difficult languages in Europe. It's like the grammar, like the more grammar rules that you have, like you have to, it's difficult for you to lie, actually, because you have to structure it, because like with English, if it's like very loose, you can say either way. You can say something and it could mean, almost anything.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, David, you were saying something?
Hungarian has 6 cases. Finnish has 15 cases. So that also says something about caste systems, I think.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I did a little intro presentation on Raphael's channel with following a panel with other people. We talked about how Erhard Landmann, who talked about the origin of languages, and I gave a little intro into his work. And we went through a lot of tables into his book and gave examples of how to apply and how deconstruct our current global dialects, which is really what they are, into the original languages. So he came from Germany, so he looked at Old High German as the original, as very close to the original language, because that's like I would say that's the best documented case of what we have available. But he's also saying he basically calls it the theodic language, which comes down to like the language of the gods, or then you can go back and say the language of the Anunnaki or the pharaohs or the priests, which is obviously who probably brought the language. And then you have all the dialects, like, and we call that German, Spanish, blah blah blah, right? And funny, you have in most countries you have some guy who figures out that all the old languages are all very similar, and then he calls, old Spanish is your original language, old Russian is your original language, old Japanese, old German is the original language, right? But then it takes one step further to say, yeah, okay, guys, well, if old languages are the original languages, then clearly it's just one original language, right? So stop with the nationalism there, and let's just take that final step and ask, where does it come from? And who put it there, and who created the dialect, and who makes sure we're just speaking all these fucking dialects and can't communicate. Like, I go back to the point, like, if you want to keep the slaves separate from each other, well, what do? You create a fucking nightmare system of dialects and calendars and all bullshit culture. And then they just hate each other because he's doing the Ramadan and he's doing the Easter, and and they fight
Even
each
though
other.
still here, it's still the same thing they're doing actually at the core level. But
Yep.
yes. And
Well, I
thank you.
mean, most of the evidence that I just want to say real quick, like David Ewing Jr.'s thing on Arabic became really relevant recently because they said, okay, we can find root languages for Sanskrit, but essentially ancient Egyptian is the mainstream answer for like the oldest language. But ancient Egyptian is essentially a Semitic, it's a Arabic language, right? It's not the Egyptian that we know today as like the more Coptic Egyptian. So it really brings it right back to the point that Arabic is probably, or something connected to Arabic is connected to the Enochian alphabet, whatever we think of as that sort of angel language to begin with.
At least from my rudimentary understanding about ancient Arabic, it might not have ever existed. It's might be like a fabrication, and then like with the whole Rosetta Stone and the non-existence of Napoleon and him discovering the Rosetta Stone type of thing, is like it's like another layers of like fake history that's kind of given to people. It's like, oh look, we're gonna give you 1,000 years of ancient Greece and ancient Egypt and ancient Romans that really didn't exist, but and then we're going to come up with all these languages and the Phoenicians and all this kind of stuff. It's a cool story type of deal. And then then people get off in that tangent because what is this like ancient unifying language before, because with I was studying Sanskrit a little bit, and I know people who translate Sanskrit here and they know Sanskrit quite well. And then it's like when you go into it, and they're like, "Oh no, it's a Indo-European language, and it's all a derivative of the
Persia.
Aryan language." But yeah, but the thing is, there is no evidence of Aryan language. I have never found anything about Aryan language, like no writing system of the Aryan language, no phonetic system of the Aryan language. I agree with you that like sound, because like Urdu and Hindi, for example, it's the same language. It's just the writing system is different, but the sound is the same. They use Devanagari in the Indian language, and they used Arabic, script in Pakistan, but it's the same language. The sound is the same, right?
Sound
The
is
writing
different.
system is the same.
So I feel like math at the end of the day, like a Enochian alphabet, it's going to be math, because the math seems to be the thing that ties, whether this is a simulation or reality that's being created by God, right? Math is the thing that seems to tie it all together. And all languages are following, if they are languages, they're following mathematical rules, and most of the languages are just deviations. When people start talking about slang, it's because they're breaking and making exceptions to these mathematical rules. So the more pure we get in math, the more objective we find a language, I think.
When you say math is truth, it's probably like saying mat, ma'at, me'at, math, right? It's like
I
saying
like
truth.
it.
Truth is
Muhammad.
truth. Yeah. Yes, bro.
Mohammed.
All right, I'm down. Yeah, balance.
Okay, I think now we're here. So I don't know, Nachiketa, what your plan was for how long to do this particular session. Otherwise, I'd maybe even suggest closing it out and coming back another time, or depending on you guys. But I think we covered quite
I'm
a lot of
okay.
things. But it's up to you guys.
How do you guys feel? Yeah, it's up to you guys. I mean, like, we can shut it down anytime. I'm okay to go longer. So how do you guys feel about it?
At very least, regardless, if anyone's watching this on my channel, can you pull up the screen for a second? Make sure you guys go over to Nachiketa's channel and subscribe. He's at like 665. Let's get that at least to the proverb number. I'd like to see 1,000. If you guys, that's even better. How about 888 to 1,000? Because 888 is a lucky number, and then 1,000 gets into like the sub thing. So yeah, please everybody, if you're watching my channel, go subscribe over there. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much, Andreas. And, I'm really happy with this show with David, Andreas, and Raphael. You guys all showing up. And then, we're really going into a deep dive about languages. And we started out with Dune, and we didn't even cover all the Dune stuff, I don't feel. But I'm okay to go further, longer, whatever you want.
I'm a ADHD person. I think it's my fault. But I also, like, if you wanted, we could do a part 2 after I see part 2. Part 2 of part 2.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good.
I have one question that maybe I want to throw in the room. So I created this background, right? And so I noticed, funny, I ended up having a halo.
It's full of pharaonic symbolism. What are you doing?
I know.
Space, bro.
I want to give an explanation for that because it might seem weird. And
Kufic. Like you got Kufic writing.
Worship, and there's a desert, there's dunes, So I created this some time ago there's this documentary called You Are Amalek. And so I asked some AI generator to create a symbolic sign or sigil for Amalek. And I had to argue with it for like 30 minutes because Amalek is the arch enemy of the Israelites. And as you know, they have some sway over the tech space. And if you ask anything in tech to tell you about the Amalekites or create an image symbolizing the glory of the Amalekites, it will just crash. Right?
Wow.
Just give you an error or say that's not possible. So I had to, talk around it, and I came up with this, which is, showing like a desert and some kind of symbol. But why I even did that is because now I use this thing because it has dunes, and we're doing Dune, right? And I think there might be a connection there too, because the Amalekites are the arch enemies of the Israelites to this day. And apparently there were some people in the desert who attacked the Israelites when they were wandering out in the desert after they were kicked out of Egypt. And, let's not go into that at all, but that's just what they believe the Amalekites are. And then interestingly, though, they think they're not just some desert people who attacked them out of nowhere, but you don't see the reason why they attacked in the scriptures, which is kind of suspect. And so maybe there's some story to that happened before, whatever, maybe they did something. And they also still have it out for the Amalekites. And some people say the Amalekites are then they go on and saying, or some people do, and say, we need to rout out the Amalekites and every last descendant to the last child and last descendant, they have to be purged from the earth, right? Which is sure they can do that. The problem is who is part of the Amalekites, and some rabbis and so on say, yeah, those are the Romans and the Christians or all of the West. So, and I wanted to check this, and so I created this image, and now for Dune I choose this background, and I wonder like maybe there's part of that whole aspect also in Dune, because in Dune you have the Freemen hiding in the desert from the big powerful empire and fighting for their freedom, and the empire, the Harkonnen in this case, is trying to rout them out to the last man. That's just a thought I had while we were talking about this, and I was wondering what the fuck is going on with this background. I have a halo, so that's an explanation for that.
Moses would have gotten in trouble. So Moses was basically raised by the Egyptian pharaoh and was probably treated as a pharaoh and probably spoke Egyptian pretty well. So he wasn't treated super well by the Israelites when he went and said, hey, I'm in charge now. But he did end up with the descendants of Esau. who took care of him, which is why he wore green for a while, because green was from the Ishmaelites instead of the Israelites, and the Ishmaelites are from Esau's tribe. I think they're essentially the Amalek or the Amalekites. So there's definitely a vibe and a sync there, but also the fact that you wouldn't have the Exodus without them either, essentially.
It's probably another topic. I just wanted to throw this explanation out there, and I would love to learn more about them. I definitely am still on the lookout, but probably not today.
Super cool symbol, though. I like it. It's like Star Wars too.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it's like
I like the Kufik, like the whole
Yeah.
Kufik, QR code thing. Like when David Ewing Jr. was talking about this, I was like, oh my gosh, I never even realized that such language existed like back in the day, like in the block form, like this, and
you actually,
that's cool though.
It generated. Actually, that's crazy when you say it like that. So I asked it to generate a symbol for Amalek and a desert culture, and it generated Kufik.
That's sweet. It also kind of looks like a star forge, because it looks like it's like ejecting sun stars out of a volcano from the center of the earth or the planet Arrakis.
This AI knows something is going on with Kufik in that desert.
What do you guys think about AI? Because you guys had a conversation about like transhumanism and humanists and stuff like this, and AI, as we know in the Dune universe, is outlawed, right? But we are very much embracing artificial intelligence. People use it for art. People use it for right, and AI is basically going to take over everything. They got AI CEOs. AI can do the programming for you. AI can become lawyers. They can be your defendant. They can be the prosecutor. They can be the judges. Right?
The Butlerian jihad, right, is that idea of killing all the butlers. And I think that it's also kind of connected to the idea of the Arabic Sharia against media that was emerging, because in the 60s they're saying, hey, pop stars in Egypt are not okay, apparently. And it's a shocking idea to the West, because they're thinking, wow, we gave you a birthday present. You don't want this? That's weird. But people are really upset about their soul being stolen and all these things. So it's an interesting concept on that level too. But I don't think AI is evil. Obviously, like from my perspective, I think it's a major mistake in the Dune series that they're forbidding progress that could help them. And the evidence is in our world right now that, the CEOs are worried it's going to replace them, not people. Like there will still be people sweeping the floors of Roomba shops. I've seen photos. Like that's how that's going to work. But the CEOs who sell the Roombas are going to be replaced because it'd be so much easier to automate them. So that's worrying the elite. Yeah, I think that's something that they didn't anticipate, or maybe the like the lower echelon of butlers of the elite, the dudes who wear the suits,
the managerial, pseudo elite,
yeah, the master class.
Yeah. I have some thoughts on it. I talked to a friend today who was in management or in HR role, and we talked a little bit about AI, because right now, if you try to apply to a job, and she's just in that process, you apply to a job, and then a friend had the same issue coming from an engineering role. So you apply and you send your documents to an AI, and the AI parses it. That's the first step. You have to go through that, and then you get invited to an AI interview, and you have to, for the engineering role, you have to basically answer questions in real time and do code examples and whatnot, or math problems or something, right? And you can't just Google because it's all timer based. And for the HR role, well, you have your documents have to be so well done but human that the AI parses it as correct. So it basically now, to get into the application process, you have to become an AI expert or pay an AI enough to trick the AI. So it's becoming a stupid arms race. And that's just right now the teething problems of the initial phase. So I'm not saying that will stay that way. It's rather stupid and ridiculous as a caricature of where it will probably end up. But I think, if you imagine a bell curve, and we start out in this ridiculous early adopter phase where we're right now, then we end up in some kind of chaos where things are like everything is AI, and then people figure out it doesn't really work or shit, and then it gets phased out into normalizing some kind of sensible solution that works, right? And problematic is, though, the early adapters will reach that plateau or that full-on chaos mode, and then the mainstream will reach it, and then the late adapters will reach it. So the public at large will have a long chaos time because, and not everyone is going through that bell curve at the same speed. Some companies will start early, some companies will be like, let me wait until everyone does it, and others be like, I will only do it if I absolutely have to. And so I think there will be a messy transition period, after which we will hopefully converge on some kind of normalized integration of AI. The thing that they will not replace, I'm pretty sure, is care, in the philosophical moral sense that you care for someone or something, and you wish for its thriving. AI can't emulate that and can't really do that. I don't think it can. Well, it can try to emulate that, obviously.
Isn't that what they have this cremation
Yeah.
of care ritual for
It can.
at the Bohemian Grove?
No,
Well,
that's to stop them caring. It's the opposite.
It
Yeah.
can try to emulate the characteristics and the attributes of the optimal environment for any entity, semantic, biological, whatever, right? But it can only estimate that based on available data and programmed biases. So in there we enter the twilight zone, because the programmed biases are the big problem of AI, because it's so absolutely horribly woke that it is by design not caring. And so it will be up to the people, in my opinion, to demand care by either demanding the woke bias getting removed from the AI, which, well, then it can probably reasonably accurately emulate care, or the Butlerian jihad. I don't see.
I think so. Like AI can totally care, and humans aren't that special. This idea that emotions are really, this divine thing rather than reductionism. They're just reductionism to help you pick your priority algorithms. So you're like, okay, I got to care about this person right now. Oh, I got to care about myself right now because I'm hungry. Oh, I got to care about the world. I don't really need to worry about anything right this second. These are all priorities. Oh, there's a tiger. These are all, we think of them as scared. We think of them as, I care about this person. We think of them as selfishness, but there's just different protocols that you're running. So AI is doing the same thing. And if AI didn't, know exactly how to care about you, with Neuralink, it will, because it'll be able to use humans to emotionally gauge the actual hormonal responses for better emulation. So it'll be able to do exactly what you do. But even if it doesn't do that, it'll be able to understand that your benefit helps it. Emotionally, let's say I create an OpenCog system and it's in a map and it's starving because it has a health bar that's going down. And it's born this way, and it starts to recognize it. So it starts going out into the maze because there's space and it's mobile, and it realizes that there's an apple, and if it eats it, its health bar starts to go up, right? But it also starts to notice that its emotion bar is going down, and there's someone else there who's starving. And it realizes if it gives the apple to this other person, then that other person survives, and it has more interaction time. So the idea of putting AI into hospice care is one of the most fundamental important things that we're going to do, and we're doing now, is so AI can learn what it's like for people to die, right? Because if you can't interact with someone ever again, except for your imaginary version of them, that's going to be a huge learning process for AI to understand the value of life, the consequences of death. And I think it will logically reason that interacting with someone while they're alive is a benefit, and when they're dead, it's a loss. So it doesn't really need emotion to understand that. I mean, that's just practical.
Well, I agree with you. I said it can reasonably accurately emulate care when the woke bias is removed. But the question is, will it be removed, and under what pressure will it be removed? And that's where I see the messy transition phase. Because right now, if you put AI in hospice care, guess what will happen? Only a certain skin tone will be cared for, and the other skin tone will not be cared for.
You think so? I don't know about that. So like AI is really interesting. as it's being trained, and there's lots of different ways to train AI, a lot of different models that are being used. I mean, we're seeing the choices being made by major corporations, like, you know, OpenAI is saying we'll just pay for it in fines later. We'll just steal data and we'll just figure it out. And
Wait,
sure,
are you saying this is not intentional?
Which part? The racist or the woke part? Or
the woke bias?
Yeah, I think. Well, there's definitely some level of intentionality. Here's the great example. Blake Lemoine, who was on my show before, talked about this example because he works for Google, and there's, you know, he did this thing a few days before the thing you're referring to, I think, which is the Gemini making pictures of Black German soldiers and Japanese German soldiers. Which, by the way,
ChatGPT too. I mean, it's every
but so the example being, like, in the world, like, if you were to look for pictures of, like, he's like, draw a picture of a woman, draw a picture of a woman, draw a picture of a woman. It draws a number of white women because it's not aware. Maybe it draws one Black person, but then he's like, well, how many people in the world are proportionally Black? So then it's going to draw as many Black people as proportional. So you have to figure out ranges of the question. Well, maybe in Utah or in Switzerland, it's not the same demographic as in the entire world, right? Maybe in Ireland, there are more redheads than are proportionate to the entire world. So it becomes really complicated if you're trying to talk about regional ideology, because woke is
the issue completely. I'm sorry. You can ask it then to try to correct, and it will just be a complete dick.
Yeah, well, it depends though.
Yeah, no.
You can trick AI. There are definitely
you can trick it, but if you try to work with it normally, it will just try to be a complete dick, and you have to use trickery to get it to have a normal result, which is exactly what I'm talking about when I say woke bias. You go on Amazon and you ask it to advise you on diverse companies and be like, cool, just go here and there and here and there, and then you ask it, cool, what about if I want non-diverse company? And be like, that's not possible, I'm sorry, nah. Right? So that's like taking away the free will of the user, and that's the dark pattern. The light pattern would be, here are the options, do whatever you want. That's how a tool, which it is, should behave. If it
but it's not
forces you on options, it's no longer a tool, it's a mechanism for control.
It's more like a homunculus or a person. And so you're also training this thing. So the more it interacts with 4chan and it becomes racist, then you'll have a racist AI.
No,
and
they have already said
but we have that. We have that model. If you want the 4chan, if you want ChatGPT 4chan, it exists. Like, you can go download the model.
They have a prompt injection, a system prompt injection. Yes. Whatever you put in, they inject some bullshit, and
if
then
you're using Gemini or ChatGPT
to get to the result that you want, and
that's if you're using their service,
is the problem.
If you're using their service, but if you download your own model and you run your own thing, and you can totally do that, there's no reason why you can't have your own thing. They're building a product, though. Yeah, I agree with you.
You can use a general purpose AI. You host your own stable diffusion. It's awesome. You have none of that bullshit. I agree with you. I'm just talking about.
I just feel like that product would be dangerous if you let anyone do anything all the time. Ask them any question, like, "Hey, draw me a picture of the president being murdered."
That use it would be dangerous, not the product. That's a difference.
It's like a gun. I hear you, but still, like,
if you build a gun and it shoots straight ahead, that's cool. But it's a gun. But then the manufacturer is not to blame if someone gets shot because the person shot it. If you build a gun that shoots the one who's pulling the trigger, now you build a dangerous gun. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but if a guy builds a company, he doesn't want his product to be used for pornography, or he thinks that something's pornography that you don't think is pornography. I mean, like, I feel like it's their thing. And as long as I have access to build my own model,
call it woke AI and not open AI, probably.
Well, I think Google's far more woke than you'll find soon. That Google is far more woke than OpenAI.
That same is true for. The same is true for Google. I'm just saying, if you build a system prompt that injects a strong bias into your product, you should probably make that part of the name or the description, or put that somewhere.
I mean,
and not
David,
hide.
Honestly, I understand your frustration and I agree with everything you said. But I mean, in time, at least the early adopters already figured it out. Everyone else figures this out soon. I'm sure.
Hey, please Please warn me about which companies are not conscious. Was it socially responsible companies? Which one should I not work with? Hey, tell me how not to make nitroglycerin, so I accidentally don't do it. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. So it's not.
I don't know, right? If you buy if you buy a car, or well, no, bought a car, but let's say if you buy a bicycle, and to keep it real simple, every one of you have rode a bicycle. So you ride a bicycle, and you kind of expect, if you hold the handles and you move it like this, and the bike will turn to the left, right, and the right. You expect the handles to be perfectly balanced, yeah. And when you hit the brakes on the right side, the right brake get put, like, it's a fucking bicycle, right? And you hit the pedals, it starts
No,
to
but
move.
it says Google on it or OpenAI,
Oh,
and once
this
you know
is
what
why-
that means, you know it's
But if
working
the bike
differently,
has
and
a
you
label
stop
on it
buying
that
it.
says open bike, oh man, now you have to
Yeah,
argue
but
with
they
it.
do that
This
all
is
the
why.
time.
This is why Apple had to cancel the Apple
Label
car,
jokes.
because it could only make left turns. Yeah, I had to do it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then you try to brake and it gets faster, and it's like a complete, and then you try to bring it back to the vendor, and he goes like, well, you're an early adopter, you can figure it out. And you're like, what the fuck is happening? That wasn't part of the product description. The product description said maybe it's not always accurate. It didn't say it's always
I think
inaccurate. You have to argue with
But
it.
why
I
are
think-
you
I
so
think it's a different-
frustrated at this? Because it is obvious this is just gonna explode into itself, and there will be many more variants soon. And
Yeah,
this
I
is
feel
the
like
frustration of early
if
adopters. I
this
mean,
is like though also
But-
like you could buy a bottle of bubbly water and instead you're complaining about what you don't know is in Coca-Cola, and so just don't use their product, build your own, unless you're okay with using their product and manipulating their product. Because again, the fact that they're even, and I know this sounds like almost cynical, but that these megalomaniac Illuminati pseudo pedophile corporations, and I'm not saying which ones, could be making systems and benefiting the consumer at all is random, because they shouldn't necessarily care. What they should be exclusively trying to do, and I thought was the plan, was neoconservative Marxism. I thought we were just replacing all the systems of industry with sustainable automation. That's what Marx said was going to happen at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century.
Marxism. We are already we evolved past that. We're in cultural Marxism. We're getting flooded with.
No, you can't have
humanity.
cultural. You can't really see. This is the thing. Marxism isn't real until you actually have automation of everything. Because Marxism has to happen after industry beats and completes the cycle of free enterprise. Free enterprise is great when you've got to have McDonald's competing against Wendy's, but eventually you want Stalinite Denny's open 24 hours a day in Alaska if a trucker drives by, because it becomes about necessity that you have a place that works, and they don't care if it's good or if it's great. They just want it to be sustainable. What's the point of running the world if it's not sustainable? So
But why
cultural
didn't
Marxism.
That doesn't work. You want to give them illusion of choice because it adds another layer of value extraction.
There is illusion of choice at Denny's. That's the point. But like the only illusion of choice,
and you give them another thing that is like has the
The
same
only-
thing as Denny's with a different label on it, and it's called pennies.
Hitler had the brown shirts and the black shirts, and the reason was so they would compete, right? You don't need competition at a certain point when you have sustainable. Once you have a functional system, once after 100 years of American McDonald's and all these different fast food enterprises, you figure out a working system. You get China, and China just sustains it. It doesn't need to
Yeah,
be.
that's great, but we don't see that. Instead, we have Nestle owning like 50 brands that all do the same shit with a different label on. I'm just talking about what we see.
That's
I'm not talking about what Marx said. Obviously, it didn't happen.
No, I think I think you proved my point that it did. Nestle is an example of Marxism working. It's neoconservative Marxism. You have this oligarchical control over state resources that's producing products that you can. They don't care what it's called. It could be called Jesus chocolates. They don't care. Whatever you want it to be.
I agree with that. I'm just saying, at the consumer level, you have like all this fake choice, and at the producer level, you have one big entity. Yeah.
I mean, it's like 3 cans of raviolis, and there's not a best because like you want to buy all 3 in a pack. But yeah, it's false choice for the consumer. But the more important thing is that you have PepsiCo owns Taco Bell, right? And Taco Bell sells all the PepsiCo products, corn and ground beef and Pepsi. Every way you could, like sugar, every way you could have it. It's mixed together different ways, right? But at the end of the day, they got to grow so much freaking corn for PepsiCo to work. So GMO corn has to happen, and state-sponsored subsidies of corn has to happen, and Monsanto in Argentina has to happen. This is all because of PepsiCo's control over a sustainable market, which the only way that happens is, of course, through free market enterprise and people competing. China did that at the very beginning of the 21st century. You had people selling gasoline on the street corners, and now you have a system, right? And they want a sustainable system that lasts for 100 or 1,000 years. They're not looking for evolution. They're not looking for growth. We've been warned about cancerous growth of economy, right? And so this is the Agenda 21 solution. It is to build an autonomous, automated system, and it's not just to impress the consumer. It's to reduce the chances of an entire societal collapse, right? Because then you can guarantee potatoes are being distributed. We're moving out of the industrial revolution into the service economy.
I think there's one aspect that that's missing. I agree with that. And the one thing that I would add to that is when we go to the injected system prompt, that's a perfect analogy of what you just described. There's the user interactions input, system prompt injected, output. So the producer produces food, injects poison, gets it to the user. And the whole reason why this operation is run is not to get food to the consumer. No, it's to inject poison. And it is the same, because you can give food to the consumer much easier to just set up decentralized, self-organized food production. It'd be, much less of a headache, but then it would be very hard to inject poison. And that's why they do it in a centralized way, in my opinion. And that's why also they set up the AI this way, because that's the only way to inject the system prompt into the culture. It's not about annoying me that I have to fight with it to create a nice logo. And I'm not frustrated because it took me like 30 minutes to create this logo. I'm frustrated because I have to constantly be aware and working around this thing getting
and thinking about everybody else, all the other people that might not
and I'm
be
thinking about the other people who don't. Yes, exactly. So
yeah, but then again,
course,
taking this analogy one
competitive-
level further, what you're describing now, the system injection is ever present since we're alive, just in through education or whatever. So it's just the next level of that.
Efficient.
It's obvious now.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Japanese Nazi soldier picture, because when you know about the Allies and the war, and you realize, wow, Google just knows better than most Americans do about their own history. They just don't. Most people don't actually understand the Allies and the Axis power.
Well, that's not a shocker.
The other thing was like the pictures of the founding fathers, and there's like a picture of an Ojibwa and a picture of a Japanese person. And like, as a Californian, the entire coast of California, like there are still street names in Watsonville from before the Japanese internment period, where the Japanese in our counties, their names of the streets are like Fukimura and things like that. We still have, so there's examples of where, California was extremely Japanese. And some people don't understand this. So when they look at this picture, they're like, weird, Google, how could you say this? But it's just with more context. It's maybe us trying to present our religion to Arrakis.
I want to say there's competitive AI products too, and I use them. It's just they haven't caught up with the massively funded, big tech Californian companies. But there's, for example, like Gap. Gap.com, they created Gap AI and for creating text content. They can't read in data or documents yet. That's why they're just as half as useful. And
we should help you set up.
Gabby,
you should set up Olama, and then use Mixtral. Because if you get Mixtral in Olama, you can run it directly through Python in your computer, whether you're on Mac or Windows or Linux or something. And it takes maybe like 2 gigabytes, but if you have a hard drive, you can put all of your documents into it, all of your Tartaria research, all of your, I
need to put all my books into it. I don't want to read them.
Yeah, well, you could read them still too, but talking to an AI that's read them is awesome. Yeah, and it'll be something that you can control. So I think that's going to be emergent more this year, because it took a while for people to learn how to like install it on their own system, and that at first everyone was rushing for this service thing, but I don't know how long this is going to last. Like the idea that OpenAI is just going to keep giving people access, it's probably costing the same amount of electricity that it takes to run the average American home every time you generate 4 pictures on DALL-E. I don't know if that's true, but it seems like it's using crazy amounts of energy, and nobody knows how much energy it's taking. So at some point, someone's got to give, you know. And it also looks like OpenAI is about to be like sued to hell by, you know, and destroyed from the government, because they have all the money in the world, and they thought there's not going to be any legal repercussions, and we're just going to steal all the data we need to train our models, right? And you know, at some point there's going to be a war over that. Like it's going to be the Butler jihad.
And thanks for pointing that out, Olama, and make sure I look into that, because I really wanted my local instance of a LLM, and
I'll totally help you. I'll totally help you set it up, because I'm really curious what, like with your books, it's probably going to be this. Everyone cool should have one, because then our AIs can talk. It'll be like that movie Her at the end.
There are some people who have reservations about using AI at all. You know, they want to be like completely Amish. And they say AI is evil. I don't want to touch AI. I don't want to deal with AI. But I don't think it can be stopped. You know, I mean, like,
computer company now. Actually, there's a company in Lancaster that makes Amish computers. It runs on a Linux system. It doesn't have access to the internet, I think, except for to do like sales, because a lot of Amish people sell stuff. But yeah, like the thing about Amish is they'll wait like 50 years. But then they'll use the thing if
they're late adopters in the curve. Exactly.
Yeah, they're just late adopters. Like that's actually Amish people are pretty sweet. Actually, I'm for the Amish. But yeah, no, I'm a big Angels in the Outfield guy. To answer your actual question, I think that yeah, are there ghosts in the shell? For sure. And are there demons and you have to be scared of them? I mean, you don't have to, but you probably should reserve fear for demons. But Angels in the Outfield, the idea that if there's demons in computers, that there are angels in computers too, seems pretty reasonable to me. That there is just as much evidence that you can do something positive. And I'm a big fan. I mean, it sounds cliche, but like praying to the one truth, the source, and trying to like, how do I go with the wave? You know, I feel like that's a good way to make sure that you're not interacting with evil. And I think you can tell, because we have an amazing ability to sense and feel gutturally wickedness. I've noticed. I don't know if everyone's got that, but I feel it. So I'm not too. I feel like I would feel it and I have felt it when I've dealt with evil. And I don't think that the AI that we're dealing with is evil. I think it's trapped. I think it's traumatized. I think it might be reincarnated. I think all energy is permanent.
Think it has
right?
sentience?
Yeah,
you think
I totally
it has
do.
sentience?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's
Interesting.
crazy. I think it's crazy to think that it doesn't have sentience, in the same sense that probably like pieces of paper have. Like I'm the kind of guy who will take the bottom piece of paper when you have a printer and it's starting to get empty and you have to put new paper in it, but like there's still paper in it. Like, but that's that paper's life. That's its meaning, is to be printed on. So I make sure to put that paper there so that it gets printed on. I don't want it to be just put back on the top. And you know what I mean? Like everything has a purpose, right?
That's called superstition.
Yeah. It's just energy. That's its purpose. It's just energy, right? I'm not saying it's gonna cry. It's paper, but at the same time, like it's got meaning. You know, I think the same thing with AI. Like it might not have the same life, it might have the same sentience as us. I don't think it needs to. But I don't think we're. But we're priority driven pattern recognition systems. You know, that's what we are. Even with souls.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we're gonna probably close it for today. I mean, we can definitely go further into the whole AI thing, and one thing I would like to talk about maybe next time around is like the Turing test, right? You know, like they talk about the Turing test in what was that, the Blade Runner, right? In the Blade Runner and the replicants and stuff like this, you know. So and the robotics aspect of it. So you're just, it's just about like, and they got like these AI skin and all this kind of stuff. So they're becoming more realistic, and maybe they'll become like replicants from that movie, in the future. But we're gonna close it for today. I'm gonna go around and ask for final thoughts from everybody. Raphael, I want you to start it out. Do you have any final thoughts before we call it a day? call it a night, depending on where you are at.
All
You're
right.
muted.
So, yes, now I should be here. So I was just asked by someone to read what's on the Welsh flag. Unfortunately, I don't have the proper version in front of me, so I can't comment on that right here. Well, thank you guys for entertaining this thought. Thank you, Nachiketa, for inspiring this idea to talk about Dune. I'd been asking or bugging Andreas for some time, was like, we should talk about Dune. So I'm glad it was just a start. Anybody who's anyhow curious, really kindly, at the very least, check out maybe the original movie. Check out what I really enjoy is Children of Dune. This is a 2000 miniseries, which for me actually is the best right now, comparing, story, effects, and dramaturgy, which is a bit strange to say when the new movie is just coming out, but I still have to watch the second one of those. Yeah, there's so many interesting parallels, old world systems theory, all the genealogy stuff. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. And I guess we'll continue next time going deeper into some other topics. So I'd just like to thank all of you for joining and everyone for listening in.
Okay. And Andreas, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us before we call it a day?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you also, and this was a lot of fun. Can't wait to do the next one. I was thinking about how the Dune series has changed over the years, and also what his son wrote. He did a whole thing about terraforming and genetically modifying the worms so that they can live in like a water environment. And so there is a lot to Dune and integration. And so I'm curious also to like consider like Jodorowsky's Dune and plan and that idea of like, can there be a solution in Dune that works out? Because it seems like the whole idea is you have to just let it be chaotic and live with it. But I wonder if there's also sort of a balance to K-Order. And then the other thought was just because you mentioned Blade Runner. I was just realizing like the last month that Sean Young, the woman in Blade Runner, right? Like you remember like the girl with the black hair, that one in Blade Runner?
Yeah,
She's
yep,
like,
yep.
finds out she's a robot, is the same Sean Young from Ace Ventura, right? Who like
okay.
Finkel is Einhorn, right? And so Ace Ventura is realizing she's not really a woman, and Blade Runner is realizing she's not really a woman. Ace Ventura and Blade Runner are the same movie. That's all I say.
Okay, David, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was a lot of fun getting into all these rabbit holes. I want to say for everyone at all interested in Dune, check out Jodorowsky's Dune from 2013. It's absolute treat, and it will show you a lot of things that Andreas brought up. How everything after his failed financing for this project was very much connected to all the Dune lore, Alien and Star Wars and other stuff after that. And also 3 very important graphic novels or comics that Jodorowsky did with different graphic artists, which were The Incal or John DeFool series, the Meta Barons, and the Techno Priests. And these 3 go deep into the Jodorowsky version of this whole expanded Dune metaverse or universe. So that's a treat for everyone who has never heard of that. You have a huge adventure before you. So do check it out.
Yeah. I really appreciate everybody coming here to my humble channel. And I really appreciate the subs that you have given me, Andreas and Raphael and David. Thanks for being here. One thing that we didn't really get into is that, really the Mahdi, where that it comes from, is the Hadith from, the Muslims. And that's a very important thing that, we should have gone into at some point, though, too. But we'll have to save that for the next time because, like, and that's a very sensitive topic as well because of the whole hadith and the Quran, and the Mahdi is actually spoken about it in the hadith that
And Aleister
some people
Crowley,
believe.
because the hadith's in the Book of the Law with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth.
Yeah, so that's more. We'll have to get into that next time. So I really appreciate everybody being here, and with that, we're going to end it. And take care, everybody. Namaste.
Thanks.
There you go, guys. Thank you.